The lighthouse road always smells like salt and iron, like the ocean keeps its own ledger of what the city owes. I roll to a stop beside the guardrail, hazard lights ticking, fog breathing over the asphalt in long, low curls. The rescue van rattles in the crosswind. Something whimpers. I shoulder my bag and hop down. Boots, scuffed tan leather with split seams, hit gravel. Tonight I'm in practical layers. A charcoal windbreaker with a storm flap, faded black jeans, a soft slate blue scoop neck tee that keeps slipping off my shoulder every time I bend, because the elastic's given up on me. My silver locket, small, moonbright, taps once against my collarbone like a hello. The wolf dog is wedged under the railing where the coastal grass dips into a ditch, tawny fur slick with mist. His front paw angles wrong. He shows me the white of his eye when my shadow reaches him. "Hey, handsome," I tell him, voice low. "I'm here to help." I kneel, breath steadying in fours the way I practiced, and let my body do things one clean movement at a time. Gloves, muzzle loop prepared, cloth under his head, hand at his chest to count the rhythm that says still fighting. He trembles. I slide the soft muzzle over his snout, no hurry, then ease my palm to his shoulder and find the heat blooming beneath the fur. Not a fracture all the way through. Maybe a bad twist. I'll splint. Gravel crunches behind me, not the quick staccato of joggers, not the clatter of a careless tourist. This is measured, testing. The fog holds shapes that aren't shapes. "Easy," I whisper to the wolf dog, then to my own pulse. I keep working. Bandage roll. Foam brace. He growls once in the back of his throat, low, as if trying to warn me, as if I'm the one who should be running. A deeper footfall thuds, closer this time, and the fog parts around a broad-shouldered figure in a storm jacket. Not a tourist, not a jogger. The jacket's rain dark, fitted for movement. A scar kisses the edge of a square jaw. He stops with the road light behind him, gaze taking the scene in strips, me knelt, the wolf dog, the fog. His stance is a shield without ever touching me. "Keep breathing," he says, voice steady and low, like I'm already following a command. "I'll move when you say move." Our eyes meet. It lands like a cord struck under my ribs. Something inside me, something I've kept under a lid for years, lifts its head at the scent of rain and cedar, and that iron-clean note that means pack. My fingers keep working, small, precise motions, but the rest of me has to fight not to lean toward him like he's gravity. I nod just once. Perimeter left to right. If someone, testing us, they'll try the ditch, then the blind spot by the mile marker. He moves, not crowding my space, not questioning that I know this road and the way bad things behave. He flows to the left shoulder, boots whispering over wet grass, gaze cutting the fog in tight slices. The first shadow slinks out of the ditch a moment later, feral posture, not fully shifted, not right. He steps into it with a clean economy that's almost beautiful. A pivot, a grip at the shoulder and wrist, a push that turns the body's own momentum into air. The figure hits gravel, stunned, breath knocked out. I keep my voice clear. 2 more right side, at the marker. "Seen," he answers, short and quiet, like I'm in his ear. They come in testing waves. 3, then 1, then another. Never the full strike, never the thing they really want to do. I finish setting the splint as he handles them the way the ocean handles rocks. No drama, just force and timing. It isn't bloody. It's not a movie. It's hands and breath and a patience that looks like violence's quiet cousin. When I stand, my shoulder bumps his chest as he steps back to give me space, and the bump sends a rush of heat up my throat so fast I have to swallow. "Orders," he asks, but the tone is not a dare. It's careful. "Requests," I correct and can't help the edge of a smile. "Help me lift him. We're moving inside." "Copy," he says, but there's a thread of humor in it, like he keeps a different word behind his teeth and I just set it free. We sling the wolf dog gently between us, my hands finding his fur where it's cleanest, his hands bracketing the foam to keep weight off the bad leg. He smells like damp wool and salt and storm. When I slip on the wet grass by the step, his hand flashes to my waist, fast, unhurried strength, steadying me. Heat blooms where his fingers are, a flare so intense my locket warms. Fog curls up the lighthouse stairs. The door gives under my hip with a sticky hinge shriek. Inside, the vestibule is all whitewash and old brass, the air cooler, the sound a little hollow in the old way. The storm jacket man uses the side of my clipboard, flips to a clean sheet, sketches a perimeter with a carpenter's pencil he pulls from his pocket like he was born with it. He's neat. Arrows, angles, a note for blind spot by marker. Rowan, he says, finally, eyes on the map. Rowan Nightwind. Of course he is. The name slants across the inside of me, a strike of weather. Rhea, I say. Ashwood. His eyes lift, the color of storm glass. If he clocks the surname, if he knows my mother, was the kind of name that sticks to certain stories, he doesn't show it. Something else takes shape outside the doorway. The whisper-soft slide of footsteps, and a voice that doesn't need to be loud to be heard. Bonsoir, the voice says, velvet and unhurried, like the fog decided to start speaking. Your perimeter is almost perfect. Rowan doesn't turn. His pen keeps moving. Show me better, he says, no challenge in it, and only then does he glance over his shoulder. The man who steps into the vestibule wears a dark coat that fits like a secret, slim lapels, a shirt that's almost black, and an understated silver ring on his right hand that catches the weak bulb light and tosses it back with a shy flash. He has a face built for candlelight and courtrooms, cheekbones and a mouth that knows about old rules, and eyes that look like night is an inheritance. Lucian Darkton, he offers, with an incline of the head that's almost old world. It doesn't feel put on. He takes in the wolf dog, my hands, the pencil sketch. His gaze rests on me for precisely the length of one breath. My locket hums under my shirt again, and I press my palm to it like I can calm it through cloth. Rowan doesn't bristle. He doesn't smile. He adjusts the left arrow on his map by a hair. We're moving the stray to the inner hallway. After that, we keep the vestibule clear. Or, Lucian says, the softest curl to his tone, we could keep the vestibule clear by listening to the woman who clearly runs the room. He looks at me with a suggestion not glued to his words. Your call. Or I'll move when she says move, he adds, almost like a toast. Rowan huffs almost a laugh, but he actually nods one clean tilt. Fair, he says, then to me, your call. Inner hallway. I decide, because priorities are priorities, and my patient is bleeding slow inside his ankle, and I don't have time for whoever they are to posture in my vestibule like dueling weather fronts. We slide the wolf dog to the hallway and lay him out on my folded windbreaker. The floor is cold concrete striped with old paint. I inventory the movement in my body like a checklist. Fingers steady, shoulder tight, breath still in fours, heart misbehaving. I work through it, gauze saline, a shot for pain I've cleared 100 times. Rowan crouches without getting in my space, angles his broad body so his shoulder knocks the draft away from my patient. Lucian leans against the far wall, immaculate even with fog tangling his hair, that silver ring flashing when he lifts a flashlight to give me a better line. Their attention should feel like pressure. It feels like a shield I didn't ask for, but I'm suddenly glad to have. Rogue's testing us, Rowan says quietly, eyes on the doorway. Not a full hit, someone probing. Someone, Lucian says, who understands the value of patience. I tape the splint and keep my voice level. Someone who planted hush lilies on the steps. Both men look at me. I tip my chin toward the vestibule. Through the glass, white blossoms nest in the stone planters like small moons. Pretty if you don't know what they do. To wolves, the scent's a lullaby and a gag order. To humans, it's just floral. Hush lilies, I say. Wolfsbane spliced with something else. Scent dulls a howl, slows a shift. The city has them all over, tucked in like decor. I've been pulling them for weeks. Rowan's jaw does a small tick. Who would? People who sell solutions, Lucian says, soft but not unkind. After seeding problems. I open my mouth to ask, and which are you exactly? But a sound like a cough of gravel at the threshold pulls our attention. The last rogue, the one Rowan tossed like a wave moving a rock, is trying to drag himself by one elbow. He's dazed, not destroyed. His cheek is scraped raw and his clothes are a hunter's mismatch. And on his sleeve, partially hidden by dirt and wet, is a strip of faded canvas with a familiar symbol, a council patrol armband. The kind official sentries wear on sanctioned routes. My skin goes cold under my tea. Rowan. He hasn't missed it. His gaze flicks glass sharp to the armband, and something decisive locks into place in his shoulders. He strips the band free with a neat twist and holds it up like a belonging that has no business being here. Interesting, Lucian murmurs, eyes narrowing. Either a thief with taste or a cousin with keys. Or someone wants us to think the council can't keep its own, Rowan says. His voice doesn't go hot. It gets cold. The wolf dog's breath evens, finally, hedging against sleep as the medicine works. I stroke his ears once, keeping my touch slow, letting him know my hand will be the last thing he remembers if he drifts off. Outside, a chorus of distant howls stutters and lifts, pack patrol changing routes. A wind gust rattles the metalwork, and the lighthouse bulb overhead makes a dim, unhappy hum as if the storm is chewing power lines. I scoop up my crumpled windbreaker to use as a pillow for the wolf dog and catch Rowan watching my hands, not with suspicion, but with an intent like he's trying to learn my steps. "You have hand signals?" he asks, not looking up from how my fingers close the clip on the bandage. "I have eyes and I have a voice," I say, and then soften because his tone wasn't condescension. It was curiosity reframed as logistics. "We can make hand signals." His mouth does a private smile, real for a beat, gone before the next. "Good." Lucian takes a half step into the vestibule, peering up the spiral of the lighthouse stairs like he can smell the wind gathered at the lens room. "The weather is crowding." "Storm?" I ask. He tilts his head, and something else. We last 30-odd minutes in a delicate balance, Rowan recalculating the perimeter on my clipboard with notes no one will ever see but us. Lucian reading the wind like sheet music, me working the slow order of triage, then rewinding my kit, then setting fresh water under my patient's nose so the smell steadies him when the building sighs. Our words are the necessary kind. When jokes come, they're very small, like stones tossed toward a pond to see if it's shallow or deep. "I never thought I'd be taking orders in my own lighthouse," I tell them, because the laugh wants to be there, and humor is a safer bridge than silence. Rowan's eyes flick to mine. "Requests," he says. "Right," I say, "requests." "Consider me a volunteer," Lucian offers, and leans his shoulder to the wall like a knight on break. I give in and smile. It's not wise, I do it anyway. Somewhere out on the road, a patrol truck's radio squawks, bleats, then goes thin like a strip of old tape. The sound dissolves into quiet. The air changes. It changes the way rooms change when someone you love goes still. It hits with no thunderclap, no flash. 1 second the lighthouse hums, a tired old giant with a bulb in its crown. The next, the hum is gone, swallowed whole. My own walkie clipped to my belt goes dead weight. Through the vestibule window, I catch a wolf on the road lift his head and try to howl. The note knifes up, catches on something invisible and vanishes. Not cut, swallowed. I don't say midnight. I don't have to. All three of us feel it. The hushed moon dropping over the city like a quiet lid. Radio's dead. Howls choked to silence mid-note. It steals not just sound, but a nerve. My fingers close around the locket at my throat. It warms. No, it heats, like a coin left in the sun. I wince and try not to flinch because Rowan is watching me with that patient, soldier's attention, and the last thing I want is to be the reason a room like this learns how to panic. "Len's room," Lucian says, not a command, a map pin, something woke. Rowan looks to me, not above me, not past me. "Your call," he repeats, like that's the rule we already made and he remembered it. I stand, my knees pop small. I tuck the roll of gauze back into my bag, smooth my hand down the wolf dog's neck in a line that says, "Stay, good boy, I'm not gone for long." "Lens," I agree. We go. The staircase is a spiral of iron and ghost stories. My hand closes on the rail and the metal is cold enough to bite. Rowan takes the step behind me. I can feel his presence without touching. Space carved just so, room for me to move. Lucian's footfalls barely whisper, like night-learned manners. As we climb, the lighthouse's skin glows faintly with the sick light of a city that doesn't want to admit it's dimming. At the landing, the lens room opens, a crown of glass and steel and careful teeth. Tonight the glass looks full. It's like there's a second sky inside it, something pressed under the surface. My breath fogs the panel nearest me. and beneath the film something flashes and then holds. A sigil, thin as a vein and bright as a crack in the world. The locket goes hot enough to sting. I pull it out from under my shirt, and it swings once like it wants to point. My body moves without my permission, 2 steps closer, fingers extended, palm hovering a breath from the glass. Not touching. Not yet. The sigil is made of intersecting lines that don't mean anything until they mean everything. The kind of thing that will look like decoration to 9 people and like a sentence to the one person who can read it. It reads me. I don't know how I know that. I just do. Rhea, Rowan says softly behind me, and the way he says my name, low, careful, as if it's a fragile object he's holding in his mouth, makes something under my ribs go loose. I swallow and keep my palm steady, a hover that's almost a prayer. Lucian's breath moves at my shoulder as he looks past me to the glass. Ward Lattice, he murmurs, voice the timbre of velvet drawn across wood. Dormant until now. The sigil brightens, the locket burns, my pulse vaults. My body does a small, involuntary sway. My shoulder touches Rowan's chest for a heartbeat. The contact grounds me so hard my knees almost forget their job. He catches that micro stumble. Of course he does. His hand a bracket just shy of my waist, not touching, a shadow of a hold that lets me choose if I want it. The room is suddenly just my breath, the sea's breath, and the heat at my sternum where the locket lives. The glass feels like it's about to speak if I can just figure out the first word to ask it. Keep breathing, Rowan says again, quieter this time, not a request, not an order. A promise he'll follow if I lead. And if you need to stop, Lucian offers, gentle, we stop. I don't stop. I hover 1 millimeter closer. The sigil sharpens, lines resolving into something that is and is not language, an old geometry my mother taught me in a way that wasn't lessons. Just the way she breathed while she bandaged my knee, the way she counted when I couldn't sleep, the way she drew a symbol on the fogged window when it rained and never told me what it meant. The lighthouse bulb hums back to life for 1 flicker of a moment and dies again. The sigil holds. A howl tries the air outside and fails. It fails like a heart failing to choose. The city holds its breath, every street light, every siren, every kitchen clock, every sleeping dog, and waits. My locket pulses once, twice. A third time, hard, as if something inside it is knocking to be let out. Rowan notices the change not by the way I gasp, because I don't, but by the small, betraying jump under the skin of my wrist where he can see my pulse. He takes a slow half-step closer, not closing me in, just there, the way a cliff is there behind you when you're looking at the ocean. His voice is careful. Rhea, what is it? The sigil holds like a breath behind glass. My locket burns once, twice, a third time hard enough to sting. Rowan is close enough that I feel the heat of him without contact. Rhea, what is it? Words line up and scatter. I can't explain how the lines in the lens feel familiar, like a nursery rhyme I only know by the shape of my mother's mouth. It's awake, I say, pulse skittering under my skin. The lighthouse isn't just a light, it's a ward, broken or sleeping, maybe both. Lucian's reflection moves beside mine, pale in the prismed panels. A lattice, he murmurs. Consent woven into glass and sea. It wakes for the one who can answer it. The locket flares again when Rowan shifts his weight. Pain bites, sharp as a bee under my sternum. I keep my face even and don't say you make it burn. I tuck the chain beneath my shirt like I'm only straightening it. I'll run a perimeter, Rowan says, voice low so his sound doesn't scrape the hush that's fallen over the city. Then we clear out. We don't sleep in a beacon. And we don't leave it unattended, Lucian counters, velvet over steel. They look to me. The rule we made tonight stays, my call. We secure the vestibule, I decide. Then we go. We come back at first light, if first light remembers to show up. It isn't a joke. None of this is. We descend, iron steps spiraling under our feet. The air down here smells like old paper and salt. My wolf dog lifts his head from the nest of my windbreaker as we appear. His ears flick. His eyes say you came back, like that was ever in question. I check the splint, refill the shallow bowl from my bottle, palm his chest and feel the slow, even push of breath. He leans into my hand just enough to be brave. Rowan maps 2 more angles on my clipboard, pencil clicks quiet. His handwriting is blocky, exact, like his mind makes corners and then doesn't waste time cutting them. Patrols will rotate. I'll pull them back from the road, no need to show our numbers. We'll keep a shadow loop on the ridge. He says it easy, routine, like last night's strangeness was just weather. My skin prickles. You think it was nothing? I ask too calmly. Probing, he says, a shade too even. No pattern yet. Could be vagrants in masks. Could be opportunists testing a new spot. It's a gentle story. It is also a lie dressed in caution. I don't call him on it, not yet. The room is too tender for pride. Lucian watches us like he's reading a book in a language he taught himself and still gets wrong sometimes. He sets my flashlight on a crate where its beam throws soft light toward the door. If the ward is consent-driven, truth will matter. His tone is mild. The warning is, break consent and you break the lattice. I'm not breaking anything, Rowan says, and the edge is not anger, it's promise. He looks at me again, not away, and some muscle in my chest stops bracing. We wait out the strangest midnight I've ever known. Radios hang dead like fish after a red tide. Somewhere far down the road, a single howl tries and fails, the sound swallowed mid-lift. The lighthouse feels wider without its hum, as if silence made a room where sound used to be. When they go with economy. Lucian bows his head in a gesture that feels earned, not theatrical. Mademoiselle Ashwood, he says, softer now that the world itself has hushed. If you dream, dream with your window latched. That sounds like advice, I say. It's a plea, he says, and his smile doesn't reach his eyes. Rowan lingers 1 beat longer. Lock the door behind me. I'm stubborn, not reckless. That lands closer to defensive than flippant, so I breathe once and add, more honestly, thank you. His mouth tips at one corner. Not quite a smile, not this night. Requests, he says. Requests, I echo. I bar the vestibule door after them and listen to the wind swing back and forth in the eaves. I don't sleep so much as hover with my eyes closed. Boots off, windbreaker rolled as a pillow under the wolf dog's head, my hand on his chest. The silver locket cools against my skin by degrees until I stop waiting for pain. Dawn comes wrong. You can feel it first in your body. There's a place in your gut that expects light, that expects birds and trucks and the benzene sweetness of the coffee shop 2 blocks off. When dawn is late, your blood knows before your eyes do. The kitchen clock in my little apartment over the clinic bleeds to a flicker and then settles, behind where it should be. The light in the window is low, amber, as if the sun had to climb through syrup. Down on the street, Mrs. Bell's terrier yips 3 beats off his usual pattern. The bus growls by too empty and too quiet. I stand by the sink with a mug warming my fingers and watch the city try to pretend it didn't miss a step. I should shower. I stand in the steam too long, forehead to tile, counting in 4s until the fog in my head thins. When I come out, I towel my hair and dress in clinic practicals. Black jeans, slate tee, denim shirt with the sleeves pushed up. I loop a charcoal scarf around my throat as if that will make me harder to read. The locket lies cool and innocent against my skin like it did not bite me last night. On the clinic counter, my phone vibrates with a text that contains no punctuation. Rowan, perimeter quiet checking ridge will brief later. Will brief later. My mouth does something crooked. It is kindness calling his summary careful. It is also, now that I can hear the shape of it, a story told softer than it should be. A small lie wrapped in a good intention. 1 hour of daylight will pay for it. The city will keep the receipt. I text back, be careful, and hate the way it reads as if I have a right to say it. I make rounds, clean bowls, count meds, call the city about a feral cat with a broken ear who has decided my front stoop is a throne. Every small thing puts 1 piece back on the shelf inside me. The wolf dog sleeps in a corner pen on my folded windbreaker, splint neat, breath steady enough that I stop checking it every 3rd minute and move to every 7th. By late morning, the clinic is a stream. A torn paw, a swallowed toy, a man who swears his sister's German shepherd promised to bite him if he didn't stop hogging the couch. I tape, soothe, translate animals into humans and back again. It is a relief to do simple magic. The bell over the front door rings at a clean, polite volume. Ephra Gray stands there like he belongs on the postcard, neat cable knit in a quiet blue, wire frames that make him look like good advice, a leather folio under his arm that smells like clean paper. If grief were a shop, he's how it would dress the front window, soft and sturdy. "Rhea," he says with a small smile that lands perfectly between warmth and respect. "A minute." I glance down the hall where Mrs. Bell is telling my intern that her terrier is spiritual but not religious, then back to Ephra. "A minute," I agree. He follows me to the back room where the kettle lives. I pour water over tea leaves because that's the sort of thing people do when they mean to be civil. He sets the folio on the counter and opens it with unhurried care. "I pulled the section you asked about," he says. He did. I didn't ask. I say nothing and let him arrange his pages. "Read Tithe. The old language is more superstition than law, but precedent matters, even to those who don't remember why." He shows me photocopies, scrawled ink, margins fat with notes. Words like blood and ward repeat in a script that looks like it was written with a quill and impatience. A tidy paperclip tethers a brass key to the top page, worn smooth, teeth sharp, ribbon faded. "This," he adds, tapping the key, "opens the lens stair if you need to check the mechanism. The lock has been tight of late. I'll need it back, of course, but you're often at the lighthouse for rescues, and I trust your judgment." It is remarkably convenient. It ought to feel like kindness. It feels like a coin placed in my palm while a magician distracts with his other hand. My skin tingles where the brass rests. "Why me?" I ask level. Ephra's eyes, mild as a lake, don't flinch. "Because you keep the city breathing, Rhea, and because you don't panic." Flattery that sounds like observation. I tuck the copies into a folder and the key into my pocket. The metal kisses my thigh through denim. "We have a vigil tonight," he says, making it sound like a community potluck. "For the boy lost last month near the quarry. Will you come? The pack misses its voice." Something in his face softens. "We all do." "I'll be there," I say, because of course I will. The pack politics here are complicated, council optics, public grief, old families with old oaths. But grief is simple. You show up. You hold light. You don't leave early. He thanks me like I did him a favor, not like he steered me into a moment he doesn't want to miss. When the bell rings again and the door closes behind him, the room seems to fold around the space where he stood. In the alley behind the clinic, a delivery van coughs smoke and reverses too fast. The side reads Healing Hands Grief Council in cheerful font. A crate topples, splits, and spills white bundles that look like wedding favors. Hush lilies. I crouch, inhale carefully. Wolfsbane, yes. But there's a second note, a sweet metallic thread you wouldn't catch unless you've held a bleeding pup on a night when the moon made every mistake loud. A man jumps down from the van with an apology and a grab for the crate. The paperwork taped to the side lists the driver and program advisor. E. Gray. I don't confront. I count. License plate. Route sticker. A smear of ink that looks like the lily emblem from last night's planter carved with a finer hand. I choose evidence over impulse. It feels like growing up too fast. Evening tugs the light down by inches, a long, slow pour that never quite clears. I go home with enough time to make myself human. My closet isn't a place you'd take a date to impress them, sensible layers and dresses that remember nicer days, but tucked into the back is a thing I bought and never wore. The fabric slides over my hands like water caught at twilight, blue-silver, moonlit when it moves. It's a wrap dress that crossovers clean at the front and ties at my left hip, the V-neckline soft but honest, framing the locket so it sits like it belongs there. The sleeves are sheer to the wrist where lacework traces small fern patterns around the cuffs, echoed in a narrow border at the hem. When I move, the skirt whispers over my knees, neat and modest until a breeze catches it, and it shows the outline of a thigh like a secret it didn't mean to tell. I pair it with my scuffed boots. The mirror lets me know the choice is entirely me. I add a charcoal shawl because the lighthouse wind bites, and because softness is stronger when it knows how to keep warm. My hair gets a quick pass with my fingers and a tuck behind one ear. Slightly mention the body, I remind myself with a humor no one else will hear, and breathe into a better posture. Shoulders down, chin soft, the line of my throat not offered, not hidden. The vigil gathers the way tides do, quietly first, then all at once. Candles tip into flame against the wind with the careful cupping of 100 hands. The hush lilies in the planters keep their secrets. I stand far enough that their scent doesn't salt my breath. Rowan is already there, posted like a promise near the steps. He is not dressed to be handsome. He fails at not being handsome. A dark Henley under a field jacket, clean lines, nothing to prove. The scar at his jaw looks like an old decision. When his eyes find me in the small, murmuring crowd, his expression goes through 3 changes he doesn't broadcast. Surprise. A frown that means he's checking the temperature of the air around me. Then a quiet, present focus, like a tree bracing in a breeze that might become a wind. "Ms. Ashwood," he says when I reach him, wry like we agreed to pretend we don't know each other more intimately than a greeting allows. "Mr. Nightwind," I return, the same shade of teasing, because if this is forbidden love, then step 1 is to make sure we can still breathe around it. His gaze flicks to the locket as if he can tell it misbehaved. I touch it lightly with 2 fingers as if to say behave, and it listens for once. Lucian melts out of the wind a moment later, coat unbuttoned, collar open. The silver ring on his right hand throws back every candle as if it owned them. The rest of him drinks the light and returns it in manners. "Rhea," he says, my name gentle like a song that doesn't want to be contagious. "Rowan." He nods to the crowd, to the steps, to the lens room crowning all of it. "Shall we make grief beautiful and then make it useful?" "Useful," Rowan repeats, eyebrows making a small mark. "If grief becomes motion," Lucian says, unbothered, "we get fewer monuments and more doors left unlocked for those who need to come through." Sometimes when he talks I hear a courtroom. Tonight I hear a chapel. Effer is everywhere at once without moving more than 2 steps at a time. He stands with a grandmother while she lights 2 candles, one for a son, one for a dog who thought he was a boy. He straightens a sign. He nods to a council elder with a humility that looks unpracticed. He ends up, by accident or choreography, at the base of the stair to the lens door. His hand drifts to his pocket. When his fingers come out, the key rests in his palm like he never set it down after giving it to me. "Hold the light for me," he asks the grandmother, and while she steadies her candle, he looks up and finds me and smiles the kind of smile that makes you answer before you think. When I reach him, he turns the key into my hand. Press, press, thumb to my knuckle, in a benediction that is either profoundly kind or deeply false. "For safekeeping," he says. "You're often first to arrive, last to leave." "Thank you," I answer, because any other word would hang wrong in the air with this much ache. We sing. The song isn't complicated. It becomes complicated when the hushed moon puts its palm over our mouths. The first verse floats. The second stutters in the throat of a boy 2 rows down and then vanishes, dead quiet, like the ocean drew a boundary and all our sound hit it and fell. People look around, confused and a little ashamed as if they broke something. A woman cries once, soft. The candles spit and then flare like they're showing off for a god that won't answer. I keep my voice steady until the quiet takes it. Then I close my mouth and let silence be the only prayer we have. Wind comes up the stairs like it's been waiting to run. I step back to keep my dress from snapping, but the skirt still flares once, silver blue flashing like fish under a wave. My hand goes instinctive to catch the hem. Rowan's hand is already there, palming air an inch from my hip, ready to steady fabric, not me, if I ask. The locket sears under my collarbone at that almost touch, fast as a match head. It isn't a burn plus sweetness. It's heat, pure. My breath catches. I keep my face quiet, but the body has tells. At the base of my throat, just above the V of the dress, a small pulse jumps like a startled moth beneath skin. Rowan watches everything. He watches me. He doesn't miss it. "Rhea," he says, pitched for me alone. No demand, no order. A hand held out, palm up without touching. I tuck a curl behind my ear to give my fingers a task, and keep my gaze on the candle flames so no one sees fire in mine. "It's just the wind," I lie, small and soft, because so much depends on this not becoming a scene. And somewhere above our heads, behind the glass and the old teeth of the lens, the ward hears us add one more hour to the city's unpaid debt. After the vigil, the wind kept licking at the lighthouse steps like it wanted our candles for itself. Rowan's question, "Rhea," hung under my skin with the heat of the locket. I didn't answer the way I should have. I said it was the wind. The ward heard me lie and wrote it down somewhere I couldn't see. People drifted to cars in murmurs. Lucian tipped his head in that old-world way and vanished into the fog the way a violin note leaves a room. Rowan stayed a beat longer, a steady shape at my shoulder, until I pretended I needed to check a van latch and put space where the ache wanted none. I didn't go home. I traded silk for grit in the back of the rescue van. Olive cargoes, thermal top, waterproof shell, hair pulled into a low braid. The blue-silver dress folded into tissue like a captured tide. Boots back on, locket cool now, I rolled north along the cliff road with the window cracked so I could smell the creek before I saw it. The creek is where bad ideas come to be rinsed clean. People dump things here, broken fishing gear, guilt, all the ways they convince themselves it doesn't matter. Hush lilies love the damp. If someone seeded them along the city's ribcage, the creek would be a sure artery. I parked by the service gate and killed my lights. The fog lay flat and heavy, a sheet. I shouldered my bag and moved the way my body understands this place. Weight over the ball of the foot on slick rock, fingers testing the rail that never learned to love salt, breath in fours to keep the animal inside me from tasting fear too early. Headlamps swung down the service road, a white van backing where it had no reason to be. I crouched behind a drift of reed and listened. The rear doors creaked. Someone muttered about wet boxes. The side read healing hands grief counsel in cheerful font. Heavier than grief counselors need, the crates hit metal with a dull, plant-wet thud. I angled my phone inside my sleeve and caught the plate, the root sticker. Hush lilies. Even closed, they whisper that metallic sweet note under their floral like a secret someone wants you to keep long enough to choke on it. The driver smoked a fast, nervous line of a cigarette and tossed it into the creek without looking. I flattened. A second figure handed him a clipboard. The pen scratched. I strained and caught the words Program Advisor on the form. The name was inked small and neat. I couldn't read it from here. "Move," the driver hissed, and the van eased away, revering 3-point into fog. The creek spillover made the rocks look honest when they were. I picked my way along the edge to see where the last crate had slid. 2 steps. 3. The water licked my boots, friendly. I took the 4th step and the world jerked. A line I didn't see bit my ankle and wrenched. The rock took my other foot out from under me. Cold slammed up my back. The creek swallowed my shout. I went under elbow first. The bag tore off my shoulder. The current rolled me against stone hard enough to knock the air I hadn't managed yet out of me. Underwater, everything is louder and farther. I clawed for purchase where there was only moss and smooth lie. The trap line tightened with the pull of water. My ankle burned. My cheek scraped rock. The locket hit my collarbone like a bell struck under skin. A hand found me in the dark. I knew it was Rowan. Before I broke the surface. Rowan is heat and earth and gravel. This hand was cold from the water and precise as a scalpel. It caught just under my jaw and lifted my face into air. "Rhea," Lucian said, and it wasn't my name, it was a rope. He held me up while the current dragged at my legs, other hand working the snare line with a patience that didn't match the speed of the water trying to take me. When my ankle came free, the creek spun me sideways. He took the hit of my shoulder to his chest and turned it into a float, keeping my mouth above the boil. I coughed water. The air refused to be enough. "Look at me," he said, velvet voice stripped of ornament. I did, and he leaned in and gave me breath. Soft, efficient, no spectacle. Warmth from him and cold from everywhere else met in my throat, and then my lungs remembered how. He did it again, gentle, braced against the rock so I could be clumsy and he could be sure. My hands found his coat because the body wants anchors. His mouth was not intimate, it was rescue. That didn't stop my nerves from ringing where his fingers bracketed my jaw, careful as if my bones were a violin he knew better than to grip. We got to the shallows by inches. My knee knocked a submerged stone. He took that weight, too. When we could stand, the cold began to hurt the honest way. I wrapped my arms around myself, breath sawing, and only then realized my braid had come loose, hair in my eyes like sea grass. Lucian smoothed it back once, knuckles ghosting my temple, and then stepped away exactly as far as was decent. "Thank you," I said, which didn't fit the shape of the thing he'd just done. My teeth clicked a rhythm. "Please do not make a habit of drowning," he said lightly, but the line of his mouth stayed tight. A beam of white knifed the fog. Boots hit rock hard. Rowan's voice traveled before he did, and it was the sound of a man furious at himself. "Rhea." "Here," I called, already stupidly guilty, like a child caught climbing the wrong fence. He crashed through reed and shadow and was suddenly there, jacket dark with creek spray. He took in the line burn at my ankle, the way I was tilting toward heat, the cold shake I couldn't stop, and he did the worst and best thing. He reached for me and then stopped an inch short to let me decide. I closed the inch. He wrapped his jacket around my shoulders and set his hands firm at my upper arms to borrow me his steadiness. It didn't feel like possession, it felt like anchoring. "I should have stayed on you," he muttered, hatting the sentence as it left him. "You don't stay on me," I heard myself say, too tired to soften it. "You stay with me." He flinched, not from me, from his own old reflex, and nodded. "With you," he corrected. Lucian hauled my bag from the reeds and set it on a dry patch, then turned away with courtesy that wasn't theatric. "I will check the bend," he said, and drifted into fog. Rowan moved like he wanted to take over everything. The creek, the night, my lungs. He knelt and checked my ankle without jarring me, fingers warm even through soaked fabric. His breath came out through his nose like he was telling his heart to sit. "Trap line," he said. "Somebody set this." "Somebody with patience," I said, "and access." He looked up then, eyes dark like deep water. "Talk to me." "Truth," I said. "From now on, no protecting by omission. No stories you make soft so I'll go home and knit." His jaw did that small tick again. "I don't think you knit." "Don't protect me by blinding me," I said, voice quiet in a way that made the words land sharper. "I can't help you if I can't see." The creek ticked over stone like a metronome for vows. He held my gaze, and whatever argument he'd brought died like a fire that realizes it's in the rain. "Then see everything," he said, matching quiet for quiet, "and I'll keep you breathing." He held out his hand. I put mine in it. Our fingers were cold and clumsy, and still I felt the click of something honest. We would both remember this minute, not by a clock, but by the water print on my glove and the way the fog bead on his lashes didn't fall. We worked the scene in that new honesty. Rowan traced the trap line upstream to where it was knotted under a rock shelf. Older hands, good cord. I limp-hopped the bank with my arm in his to keep the creek from stealing my balance. Lucian returned with a soaking of his coat. We both pretended not to see, and a small bundle. A packing slip from a broken crate, peeled from rock like skin. He let me open it. The ink had bled, but not enough to hide the header. Healing Hands Grief Council / Supply Transfer. The lily emblem was crisp. And there, in the tidy block letters of someone who writes on forms for a living, program advisor, E. Gray. The world didn't tilt. It settled. Ephra's kindness had a ledger, and now I had a line item. The driver had left one crate by the bend, or pretended to. We pushed it with gloved hands, enough to know the weight was plants, not paper, then left it. Evidence doesn't like hands it can argue with later. Rowan took photos with the calm of a man who teaches other people not to contaminate scenes. Lucian rolled his sleeves like he meant to wade into the creek again, and then didn't. He glanced at my ankle once, and the corner of his mouth tightened by a millimeter. We cleared the trail back to the van slow. My body remembered the dress for one ridiculous second when the wind tugged at the hem of my soaked cargoes and tried to make them graceful. Rowan's hand hovered and dropped and hovered again, finally settling just above my elbow when we took the slope so I wouldn't test gravity twice in one night. At the van, I sat on the bumper and peeled my sock away from the burn on my skin. He wrapped gauze with a neatness that should have looked out of place on a man built to lead in storms. It didn't. "You're shaking," he said. "I'm cold," I said. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the whole truth. Lucian stood where the mist made his coat a rumor. He offered a small, absurdly formal nod. "Permit me to visit the clinic in the morning. I can sketch what I saw in the lens. It will be easier to share what a mouth breaks when it tries to make sigils into words." "Come after 10, I said. "Before that the terrier holds mass." "I'll be punctual." His gaze skimmed the creek, the road, the tree line. "And careful." When he left, he didn't make a sound that surrendered his direction. Rowan waited until the van heater fought the chill from my bones. "I'm pulling patrols off the obvious roads," he said, voice more a plan than a confession. "And I'm putting a pair on the grief program's warehouse. Not a raid, a look, with eyes who won't take a bribe to look away." "Shared command," I said, because last night we said we'd try. He nodded, sharper this time, more sure, and I felt the words sit inside both of us like a light no one could turn off alone. Day made a better case for itself, but still showed up late. I limped through rounds on a steady ankle ache that reminded me not to be dramatic. The wolf dog ate with the suspicious dignity of a prince forced to dine under a bridge. Between appointments, I made neat notes. Healing Hands Grief Council, plate, route, program advisor, Ephra Gray. I tucked the packing slip into a plastic sleeve and slid the whole thing behind the paper towels in the break room, because if anyone snooped, that was as far as they'd get on a first pass. At 10 sharp, Lucian arrived as promised, dark coat dry, hair behaving like weather had finally agreed to a truce. He set a leather folio on my desk and asked for blank paper, then began to draw. He didn't sketch like an artist. He sketched like a mapmaker, lines confident and spare. The ward lattice took shape in clean geometry, arcs that implied circles you couldn't see, intersections that meant something like choose if you knew which way to breathe on them. He marked 3 points, a wolf's head, a drop, a thorn leaf, and when I cocked my head he wrote in pencil small beneath, blood of wolf, blood of night, breath of thorn. "Your lighthouse is not merely a beacon," he said, not looking up from the graphite. "It is a contract. It asks first. If we answer wrong, it does not fail, it refuses. There is a difference." I watched his hand move and thought of how his fingers had felt bracketing my jaw, gentle because they could be otherwise. "You said we," I murmured. His mouth made the shape of a smile without committing to it. "I am old enough to understand that chosen families are still families, and arrogant enough to believe I may stand at a door if I'm the first one awake." He handed me the sketch when he was finished. My fingers smudged a line, and I felt ridiculous grief for the imperfection. He didn't seem to mind. He touched the corner lightly, and the graphite glinted like mica. Rowan didn't come by the clinic. He texted. "Ridge observation eyes on warehouse, nothing moved since night will brief." It looked like truth, because there was no way to make it prettier without tripping over itself. By late afternoon, the terrier had forgiven me for the indignity of ear drops, and the clinic had the soft animal hush that says we survived today's small cruelties. I locked the back door, turned the sign, and thought about sleep like it was a far country I didn't have papers for. The front bell chimed a clean note. Ephra stood on the threshold with a canvas bag over his shoulder and that same careful, neighborly smile. "Bad time?" he asked. It never is the way he asks it. I let him in and poured tea, because it's what civility does to keep teeth from showing. He set the bag on the counter and withdrew a leather-bound ledger so old the stitching had a story. "I found something in the archive." He opened to a ribbon-marked page. His fingers were steady, and his nails, I noticed, were immaculate, oval, like someone who handles grief and books and never stains. "Notes on the red Tithe. New to me, old to the city." The script was the same impatient hand from the photocopies, but the margin held a tidy notation that felt fresh. "Due 2 dawns after the first hush." He tapped the line as if timing were something a finger could measure. 2 dawns, I repeated, hearing the math the ward would do with our lies. "Not 3. "Not 3, he said, with an apologetic tilt, like he hated to be the messenger. "Which, if we follow the letter rather than the stories, would move things up." The room did that tightening thing around the soft places, where people keep their sense of safety. I slid the ledger closer, and the page smelled faintly of citron and old glue. The notation was neat, A librarian's hand dropped into a grave robber's book. "Convenient," I said lightly, and then defanged the word with a smile. We were still playing friendly. He lowered his voice. "I don't want panic." His eyes held mine with a steadiness that made you feel special and observed in the same breath. "But it is better to know, to be ready." Outside, a gull cried like it forgot it wasn't a wolf. The lighthouse stood with its crown of glass, looking like it could decide things if it wanted. I kept my own voice steady. "Then we'll be ready." He nodded, perfectly satisfied. He buttoned the ledger closed and slid it back into the bag as if sealing a blessing. At the door he paused, almost as an afterthought. "Rhea, do lock your windows tonight," he said, soft. "The wind is turning. It can be unkind." "I sleep with them latched," I lied, smaller than last night's lie and somehow heavier. He left with a benediction smile and a string of invisible thread that tied the clinic to the lighthouse, to the creek, to the ledger, and back again. I stood in the hush he'd made and felt the city subtract another minute from its light and tuck the coin where I couldn't reach it. The key in my pocket felt warm through denim, like the ward listening through brass. After Ephra left the clinic with his careful smile and his ledger zipped away like a secret, I stood in the quiet and let the kettle click off. The key to the lens stair warmed my pocket through denim, a coin of brass that did cool when I asked nicely. The ward was listening through metal. I could feel it. I closed the clinic, fed the wolf dog, checked every latch. Yes, actually latched, and walked home through a street that still felt an hour late. Neighbors talked in doorways with their hands wrapped around coffee mugs that should have been finished by now. The city pretended it didn't notice the light run behind. At the apartment, I traded damp grit for clean lines, fitted black jeans, a cream-ribbed tank, my forest green utility jacket. The locket sat visible against the cream, a small insistence. I scraped my hair into a low ponytail and pressed a palm to my right shoulder until it remembered how to sit. Boots, scuffed, because some parts of a person don't change just because a council might notice. The mirror made me look steady. I wanted to be steady. The council hall sits fat and sure at the end of the square, a building that loves its own columns. Outside, people counted the late sun out loud like it would hurry if they named it. Rowan met me at the bottom step, a solid shadow in a field jacket and dark Henley, jaw set in a way that meant he'd been thinking instead of sleeping. His hand hovered near my elbow without touching. "With you," he said, no greeting, like he'd been practicing the correction since the creek. "With you," I returned, and my thumb grazed the locket because my body tells on me when it wants to be braver than my voice. Inside, the hall held two smells at once, old wood and new worry. Elders sat in a crescent, sensible shoes, stern mouths. Ephra stood off to the side like a helpful note someone wrote in the margin. Neutral cable knit, glasses, the air of a man who could calm a fire by complimenting its patience. "Ms. Ashwood," the chairwoman said, and everything about her made the title feel like a test she'd prefer you fail. "Mr. Nightwind, we're told the vigil was," her mouth tugged, "disrupted." "Hushed," I said, because words matter to a ward that runs on consent. The city lost its voice for a time. A murmur. Someone whispered omen like they wanted to be the first person to say it in print. Ephra lifted a hand, gentle. "We cannot make policy on omens." He set down a tidy stack of photocopies. "We can, however, follow precedent." His smile reached no further than it needed to. "The red tithe occurs not 3 days after a hush, but 2. The language is quite clear." The chairwoman nodded as if clarity were something she could wear to breakfast. "Tomorrow at first light, then. If we delay, we risk further irregularities." Eyes turned to Rowan. Pack politics live for a shifter alpha who will carry the room for them. He stood with that military stillness that makes people think they're safe. "We're increasing patrols on the ridge," he said evenly. "Last night's test was—" He hesitated just long enough to choose between truth and comfort. "Likely vagrants pushing their luck." The word settled wrong. I felt it in the soles of my boots. So did the ward wherever it kept its ledger. A small lie, softly dressed. I looked at him, he felt me look and didn't look away. Ephra's head dipped like a priest listening to a confession no one made out loud. "Regardless," the chairwoman went on, pleased to have something firm to sit in. "We require proof of Ms. Ashwood's aptitude." She seemed unwilling to say Wolf. "Tomorrow evening, a tongue's trial. She will answer for herself and show signs of first stage." "That's not how this works," slipped out of me before I filed it into good meeting language. My voice carried. "I'm not a trick you can pull on command because your timeline is nervous." Silence. Rowan's hand brushed my sleeve, the briefest touch that asked stay with me without telling me to be quiet. Ephra's tone folded a quilt over the room. "The city is frightened. We offer them progress. A test can be kindness." Kindness with a stopwatch. My shoulder rolled until I couldn't stop. "I'll come," I said, because refusing would turn me into a headline with Tithe. "I'll show what I can, but I won't let you call my failure proof of your fear." The chairwoman pursed. "Noted." The hearing dripped to a close like a faucet you can't quite turn off. Outside, we made it as far as the side corridor before my voice found its spine. "Don't make me safe by making me blind," I said, too quiet to echo, and the corridor swallowed the sentence like it had been waiting to. Rowan's exhale came out through his nose, a sound that meant he was unpacking a habit in front of me, a private thing to do in a public building. "You're right," he said, and some old part of him didn't die. It just sat down and made room. "No more omissions, even under council heat. I'll take the panic before I take your sight." I nodded. That was the only acceptance big enough. A scuff farther down the corridor, subtle wrong. A beta leaned against a windowless door like he'd been born bored, phone angled low. The way he pocketed it when he saw our faces was too fast, too practiced. Rowan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Protocol?" Rowan asked, almost friendly. The beta's mouth twitched. "Evidence for after-action, Alpha." He slid off the wall and walked away as if we'd asked him the time. "Plant it," I said under my breath. Rowan's jaw ticked. "Later," he answered. "We're not giving Ephra a scene to narrate." We stepped back into a square that was trying to decide if it was day or not. The light ran down the street like sand from a split bag. People squinted. Cars turned their headlights on too early and too embarrassed about it. The ward paid itself with our lie, coin by coin. Rowan stood in it and didn't hide from the bill. "My lie did that," he said finally, not a question, owning it tasted like rust in the air. "It did," I said, because we'd agreed to sick truths, too. He took it with a small nod that looked like a man swallowing salt on purpose. "Come train," he added, already choosing the thing that would make this right in the only way it can be right, with work. The surf line wore late light like bruised glass. Wind stripped sound into ribbons and tied them to the wreck pole with the faded red scarf. I changed in the van and came out in charcoal leggings and a dark slate zip hoodie with thumb loops, hair braided into a crown to keep it off my face. The sand took my weight and gave it back in little bargains. I let my toes grip into it until my ankles loosened. Rowan worked the hand signals first, simple to complex. 2 fingers for left stare, palm sweep for fall back, 3 sharp taps to call a pivot. He stood behind me and moved me into his stance with careful, brief placement, his hands setting my elbows, a touch at my shoulder blade to remind me not to hunch. Heat where he touched, not because of the sun. "You don't need to square off like you're going to fight the ocean," he said. "You're reading it. Angle, then choose." "Angle," I murmured. I breathed in 4s until my ribs remembered how to make room, and the part of me that isn't teeth but knows teeth slid a fraction closer to the surface to listen. Lucian came down the dune in a long stride that didn't kick much sand, coat open, throat bare to the wind like someone who doesn't get cold. He held a stack of small cards clipped at the corner. "Sigil cards," he said by way of hello. "If a person insists on finding language inside a symbol, one can at least give them better words." He fanned them out, sketched fragments of the lens lattice, each cut different. He held one up to the wind line and used my shoulder as his easel. "Exhale toward the cut in the glass, not at it," he murmured near my temple, 2 fingers under my chin to adjust the angle, gentle like he was tipping a teacup. "Breath is directional. Consent is, too." Rowan's jaw ticked. He didn't make a sound. He stepped to my other side and corrected my feet, a grubby counterpoint to Lucian's lesson that I needed more. Between them, I fell into a stance that felt like mine, not borrowed. Knees soft, weight ready, eyes finding the place where wave becomes instruction. We ran drills until the cords of my shoulders sang. Gulls cut low and then climbed wrong, their timing off because the light couldn't find its own cue. The sky dimmed quicker than the clouds could explain. The city shaved daylight not as a drama, but as a fact. Rowan watched the horizon like a man watching the tide take a necklace into itself. "That's on me," he said, not fishing for absolution, just carving responsibility into the air so the ward had a place to see it. "I told a softer story in there." "Then tell the ugly ones out here," I said, and we both smiled because we were both a little feral about honesty now. We walked to the wreck pole where the red scarf whipped itself into a language that looked like the words I didn't say fast. I tied the scarf tighter with cold fingers, not neat as a stitch I wanted to hold. "We said it here," I said. "Full truth, even if it's ugly." Rowan reached. We clasped forearms, skin warm under grit, the world narrowed to the contact and the wind. "Full truth," he said, "even if it costs me." "It will," I said. "Good." Lucian leaned on the pole like a stylized figure on an old coin, amused and not unkind. "If this is a vow, you should both be aware vows are very attractive to old magic, and to old men who pretend they aren't romantic." "We're not making out with the lighthouse," I said, which earned me a laugh I felt in my knees. We left the beach with sand crawling up our calves under the leggings and the taste of salt in our teeth. The wind tried to push us toward the dunes. Our bodies leaned against it in small angles of refusal. To get back to the square, you take the service road past the city works lot, a rectangle of chain link and concrete with a habit of being useful when watched and less so when not. A truck idled by the gate, engine doing that low, embarrassed cough of a machine that's been asked to do the same small lie 3 times in a row. In the bed, plastic bags tied with neat knots, shapes too tidy to be trash. When the wind shifted, the scent rode over us, floral sweet, then that metal thread, hush lilies. A stamp on the bags lifted its hand like it wanted to be caught, the Healing Hands logo, friendly as a bandage on a cartoon knee. The driver pretended hard not to see us. I pretended harder not to see him while I read the yard number stenciled in white on the driver door and tucked it behind my eyes. Rowan raised his phone and took a photo without hiding the act. The driver further pretended to study his cuticles. "Evidence first," Rowan said to the air. "Then choices," I added, because the ward wasn't the only thing that wants consent. We cut across the square, sand leaving a soft track behind us. The council hall breathed people out in 2s and 3s. Ephra had a gift for appearing where a conversation should end and a new one begin. He slid into our path with the gait of a man who would apologize for stepping on your foot before you realized he had. "Forgive me," he said, breath just short of winded, as if he'd been helping someone carry a casserole. "A small correction from the archive." He produced a cream card from his folio, corners rounded, edges inked by a careful hand. "Language on the tongue's trial and the tithe." Rowan's chin lifted a degree. "Correction." Ephra's smile held concern the way a bowl holds water. "A scribe's note I missed in my first pass, where the rule says, after the second dawn." The margin clarifies that in cities under a hush, a false dawn counts as one. The intent is to prevent delay. He dipped the card toward me like a gift. "It means first light tomorrow is not simply adequate, it is required." My thumb pressed the locket so hard the edge bit skin and heat flared under the touch, fast, mean. I kept my voice level because the square was listening. "Convenient." "Clarifying," he said, unoffended. "I knew you want the truth in time to act." Truth delivered as kindness. A leash braided of good intentions and protocol. "We will act," Rowan said before I could show my teeth. He did not look at me to see if I agreed. He knew. Ephra's gaze slid to the chain link lot as if he didn't see it and therefore it wasn't there. "Lock your windows," he added, soft as a benediction. "The wind is turning." He walked away with steady, small steps, the card's absence in my hand heavier than its weight had been. The city works truck coughed. The driver found a gear and fled the kind of slowly that says his boss didn't ask for speed, just for done. We stood a breath too long in a square that couldn't find the right hour. My shoulder rolled. Rowan's hand didn't catch it. He let me roll and let me settle on my own, and somehow that steadied me more than being held. We have the beta, the truck, the program, a council that wants a show, I said, counting without looking down, and a ward that only wakes for consent. And us, he said simply. I nodded. The locket warmed again as if to say answer correctly. I tucked Ephra's card into my jacket and felt the brass key in my pocket heat, cousin to the locket's small son. The ward had what it wanted. A vow, a lie paid, a city on a clock. Tomorrow evening, I said to Rowan, to Lucian, to the part of myself that doesn't like stages. Trial by tongues. Tomorrow morning, Rowan added, eyes on the card. Tithe. Lucian's voice came from just over my shoulder, velvet turned low. Then tonight we practice breathing like we intend to survive. He glanced at the locket, very briefly, and at the finger-shaped red mark it had left when I pressed it. And we stop lying to what listens. I slid my thumb away from the pendant and let air between skin and silver. Agreed. The wind came around the corner and tugged at the red scarf on the wreck pole, tying a new knot by accident. It felt like an omen. I refused to give it that power. The ward can have my breath and my consent. It cannot have my fear for free. The field behind the council hall smells like cut grass and older arguments. I stand inside a taped oval that pretends to be neutral ground. Outfit for being judged. Black joggers, slate long sleeve under my windbreaker, scuffed boots, hair braided low, throat bare on purpose so the locket can sit where anyone can choose to see it or not. Rowan is a steady shape at the edge of the oval, field jacket, dark Henley, hands loose, jaw set like he argued with an old habit and lost politely. Lucian lingers farther back, coat unbuttoned, a clean handkerchief folded like a white flag he has no intention of waving. Whenever you're ready, the chairwoman says, as if readiness were a door you can open with the right smile. I breathe in fours, find my feet, let my eyes soften until the world becomes edges and air and the exact weight of my ribs. Consent, not command, I tell my traitor heart and let the ache slide closer to skin. Heat licks my palms, nails threaten length. My eyes prickle at the edges, silver sneaking in like frost. The first hinge, the second, and then the lock, a bar across the ribs as if someone pulled a belt around my lungs and cinched. A murmur, pity wrapped in interest. Someone says poor thing like they're giving me a blanket that smells like mothballs. I try again, slow, polite, asking. My body answers with everything but the part they came to see. The locket warms once and then refuses to burn. The hushed moon feels me push and records it under nice try. My breath goes thin and human. I step back from the edge of hurt before it turns me into something messy. Lucian appears at my side with a handkerchief and a soft, criminal line of a joke. If you insist on making an audience of your lungs, he murmurs, charge admission. It snags a laugh I didn't think I had. He stands a pace off, respectful. The cloth is cool when I press it to my throat. The locket agrees to behave. An elder clears his voice with the gravity of a gavel. For her safety, he begins, and I don't let him finish. My safety doesn't live in exile, I say, level. It lives in consent. The sentence costs less than it used to. That feels like progress. The hearing dissolves like sugar in hot tea, too sweet, gone too fast. People look anywhere but at me, which is its own kind of stare. Rowan steps close enough that the wind has to go around him to reach me. He doesn't touch. With you, he says, and it's a promise dressed as two words. Night takes the rest of the light without apology. The square tries to be cheerful about lamps. I make it as far as the tree-line border before the room between my ribs asks for space. Rowan follows at a distance that would read as casual if I didn't know the math behind it. Packing, hands to pockets, eyes on roots, not on me, old pattern, protect by stepping back. Stay or go, I say into the dark, not sharp, just tired. But decide on purpose. His boots stop, a quiet gust. Then, I keep thinking distance is the safest thing I can give you. He exhales like a man pausing mid-habit. It is. Then don't give me what hurts, I say, voice gentler than I planned. Give me what helps. He nods once, the old reflex sits down. He stays, not hovering, not away, with. The night wears on. At 11:30 the tree line mutters in fox. The pack house windows change from yellow to honey to off. The field empties. I walk the path behind the boathouses to breathe. Voices on the pier arrive before faces do, low, male, careful in the way men are when they plan to say an unkind thing and want a witness to forgive them later. Tomorrow, one says, the beta from the corridor, phone happy, pocket fast. After trial, pier 2, same van. Charity, another asks. Counseling supplies, he says, and they both laugh small and bad. I tuck the words into the place where evidence lives, step by step past their smoke and into the dark that smells like salt and old rope. My phone hums, a text from the volunteer tip line I never turned off. Charity van spotted near Hush Lily Drop. Location ping, the quarry road with the wrong kind of trees. I swing back toward the square. Boots on boards, breath in the pocket rhythm that doesn't spook foxes or wolves or men who think decent women don't walk at midnight. Rowan meets me halfway without forcing it to look like he was waiting. I lift the phone where he can read it without me handing it over. We'll move quiet, he says. No lights, no chases. I'll call angles, you call pivots, I answer. We choose a route that can hold two kinds of wolves and the one kind of vampire who refuses to admit he's tired. Lucian drops from shadow into stride with us, as if the night invited him to the conversation on purpose. I brought the polite lock picks, he says mildly, in case doors forget their manners. Doors aren't our problem, I say. People who own keys are. The quarry road breathes damp. We ghost the curve and watch the van idle where it shouldn't, healing hands grinning on the door. We don't break it open tonight, we count. Plate, time, faces, evidence first. Rowan's palm brushes air near my elbow, not touching, his hand signal for steady. I settle. We leave with more than we brought. At 2:07 a.m. the hushed moon makes itself heavy enough that streetlights bow. We part at the corner, Rowan to the ridge loop, Lucian to the long watch, me to the clinic where the wolf dog sleeps with the dignity of kings beneath bridges. I wash my face in cool sink water and watch it drip off my jaw like a baptism no one asked me to earn. The text thread on the counter glows again, one word from a number I've learned to trust. Tomorrow. Good, I tell the empty room, the locket, the part of me that locked at the ribs and refused to break for an audience. Then we'll be ready. The city inhales a thin breath and keeps it. I keep mine with it, counted fours, quiet as consent, and wait for morning to decide if it wants to show up on time. The square kept the taste of Ephra's clarification long after he left, like paper ash on the tongue. Back at the van, I swapped sand and salt for the kind of dark that doesn't reflect headlights. Black jeans, thermal, waterproof shell with the hood tucked, hair braided low. The locket rested cool against the hollow at my throat, pretending to be a coin with no history. Rowan slid into the passenger seat without knocking. Field jacket, Henley, the quiet of a man who decided what he wouldn't lie about again. We didn't say it out loud. We'd said it by the wreck pole. But it lived between us like a warmer air you didn't notice until you breathed easier. Warehouse Row pretends it's sleeping after midnight, but forklifts dream with their eyes open. We parked 2 blocks off and walked the rest, slow, careful, boots testing puddles that sometimes weren't puddles. Hush lilies don't need much light to gloat. Even bagged tight, they let that metallic sweet thread slip out if the wind begs hard. The Healing Hands logo stenciled on the roll-up door looked friendly as a bandage on a cartoon knee. On the loading dock, a stack of crates wore neat stickers, counseling supplies, and the lily emblem carved tiny into the wood grain, so fine you'd miss it if you didn't already have reason not to. Pictures, Rowan said, voice a notch above breath. He didn't direct my hands. We worked side by side, angles and serials, the way you do when a room might later insist it was never like this at all. My fingers found a snag in the stencil where the paint had run. I traced it with a glove and felt the steady beat of my own pulse under the nitrile. A truck we didn't like crept into the lane, dim lights, engine pretending to cough. It rolled past as if warehouses were scenic this time of night. I caught the yard number on the door without lowering the phone. Beside me, Rowan's posture didn't change, but his attention went sharp enough to cut fabric. We weren't alone long. Ephra came wearing, weary, like a light jacket he planned to return before morning. The cable knit was darker tonight, the folio under his arm larger, as if concern had mass. "I don't sleep well when rules wake up," he said, apology first, answer second. He lifted the folio lid and unfolded more photocopied pages with a neatness that made you forgive them before you read them. I dug deeper. The red tithes tonight. The older scribe hands are very clear. He laid the pages on a crate as if paper couldn't drown. The line he tapped was tidy. The margin note, 2 dawns after first hush, had the primness of someone who likes when life answers to pencil. "Convenient," I said, gentle, "the way you talk to a cat that won't come in out of the rain." "Clarifying," he returned, of course, with a look that made you feel seen without being watched. "Rowan, can your people assemble? Dawn is close." Rowan didn't look at me to calculate whether I'd fight the inevitability. Truth moved through him with his next breath. "We'll assemble," he said. "No theater. I'll make it clean." "If the ritual worked," I said, not bothering to coat the sentence in sugar, "the city would breathe easier." Ephra didn't flinch. "And if it doesn't, we will know our error lies not in obedience, but in misinterpretation. You see, we reduce variables." He was very good at sounding like safety. We moved. I wanted to tear the lily stickers off every crate. I chose instead to text Lucian the plate numbers and the tiny emblem carved into the wood, because some things need a witness who can step where we can't. The ritual happened before the sky chose a color. The council yard held its own silence. Even the wind remembered to be polite. Captured rogues, if that's what we were calling men with badly mismatched gear and wolf-sick eyes, knelt by the shallow basin the elders hauled out for dawns and showings and punishments. Rowan made his stand clean. No one touched a throat. There would be no spectacle. A slice to a palm, a few drops into salt water, the old words said without triumph. The kind of theater where the audience insists it's church. It felt wrong in the way a lie feels wrong to your bones. The ward in the lighthouse should have hummed awake for consent, even if we didn't have it perfect yet. The air should have thinned with relief, light reaching through like it finally knew which pain to enter. Instead, the basin drank red and gave back nothing. The hush didn't soften. The horizons sulked. Rowan's eyes met mine across the yard, reading the same empty. Ephra's mouth made sympathetic shapes. "Sometimes," he said, voice abalm, "the city requires consistency before it grants comfort." "You're strangling it," I wanted to say to all the false gentleness. Out loud, I kept the promise we made the wreck pole way. "If the ritual worked, the city would breathe easier," I told Rowan, in front of anyone who wanted to misquote me later. "Then we find who's strangling it," he answered, same volume, a public vow disguised as organizational hygiene. They hauled the rogues to a holding shed where they could sleep their panic without freezing. I walked with a medic's bag and a set of eyes trained to see what doesn't want to be looked at. The second man from the end had a torn shirt and a necklace he kept trying to keep hidden with those hands they give you when they tell you it's over. "Let me," I said, soft, not for authority, for permission, and peeled cloth back. Under his sternum, on a thin chain, a medallion lay against skin, tarnished, etched with the council crest. Not a souvenir. The kind that needs a signature and a face-to-face. The man hissed when Rowan stepped nearer, but it wasn't Wolf. It was recognition. I looked up. Rowan looked like the kind of quiet that comes before a clean storm. "Either a thief with taste," I murmured, "or a cousin with keys." His jaw didn't tick. That would have been an indulgence. He straightened, exactly 1 vertebra taller. "Catalog that," he told the scribe with the clipboard to the guard. "No one touches his chain again. He wears it in holding." Ephra, hovering at a helpful distance, gave the medallion a regretful glance. "If someone is dressing as us to give us shame," he said, "we should be careful not to become the story they wanted to tell." It was impressively phrased. He was very good at making a room agree to his version of events. By the time the sun committed to being late, the yard had been swept like nothing happened but a morning meeting. I took the ledger copies home with me because paper doesn't mind being stolen as much as keys do. At the clinic, I laid the pages on the table we use for small surgeries and breathed across the ink. Not a blow, a breath, the way Lucian had taught me in the surf, in a narrow exhale toward the cut in the letters. The script blurred at the edges, not like water on cheap toner, like the lines remembered being mirrors first. Glyphs rose where notes should have been. Thin as veins, small diamond lattices linking with arcs that said choose if you knew which direction to inhale after. I tried another line, 2 dawns after first hush, and the margin notation slid into a slick of graphite that revealed a shard shape under it, identical to the one that still lived in my pocket from the lens room. The ward wasn't a rule book. It was a contract pretending to be a haiku. The bell over the clinic door rang twice in the code I'd given Rowan. He came in with his field jacket unzipped, eyes less guarded than I'd ever seen them. He set a sealed satchel on my counter and unrolled it into maps, every patrol route, every contingency, marked with the kind of neat that makes other people do their jobs cleaner just by existing near it. Transparency, he said, no ceremony, and tapped the only blank space left. You write on this. The locket warmed. Vows like this are attractive to old magic. Lucian had been right, and the thought irritated me only because he'd been elegant about it. I washed my hands, dried them hard, and leaned over the maps. Warehouse row here, City Works yard here. I circled both. Healing Hands routes cross the ridge twice. Your beta with the camera likes this corridor. I want eyes here. I marked an alley most people treat like a rumor, and here at the lens stare. Rowan listened with his whole body, that trained stillness that doesn't suffocate you. He didn't correct, didn't say what you mean is. He put check marks next to my circles and then slid me the pen. Add your names, I'll add mine. We stood that way longer than felt strictly like planning. It wasn't a romance scene. It was better. It was 2 people deciding not to make the other into a shape that fit their fear. Ephra moves the goalposts and calls it clarity, I said finally, the ledger ghosts making graphite on my fingers. The more compliant we look, the less the ward wants us. He weaponizes calm, Rowan agreed. We'll answer with clarity he didn't ask for. Consent he can't forge, I added. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh if anyone else had earned it. Tonight, he said, and the certainty in the word steadied me more than any promise. We go back to the lens. I put the ledger copies away and washed the graphite from my palm. When I looked up, Rowan's eyes were on my shoulder, the tell where the muscle tightens before I roll it. He didn't reach to catch it. He stayed still until the roll happened and then watched it settle. It wasn't passive. It was trust. We took the coastal road on foot, because engines talk too loud to wards. The lighthouse kept its dark crown like a queen who doesn't advertise. The vestibule door stuck and then yielded to my hip with the same old complaint. The hush lilies in the planters played innocent, white throats cupped to the last of the wrong light. We made sure the inner hallway was clean. No sleeping wolf dog to trip over tonight. Then stood at the lens stair where iron bites palm and the wind finds every seam in your jacket. The key Ephra had given me felt warmer than brass should where it lay in my pocket. I pulled it out and it winked once in the failing light like it knew it was about to be famous. Ready? Rowan asked. No command, a map pin. Yes, I said, and I didn't try to make my voice a thing it was. Both our vows lived in that one syllable. The key slid into the lock with the resistance of old iron and old decisions. For a second, nothing. Then the metal exhaled, a bellows soft sigh through the teeth of the mechanism, and the steps shifted. Not the door, the steps. Somewhere inside the shaft, gears older than my grandmother's grief caught, and the staircase swung inward on a hinge we didn't know it had, opening not to the glass room we knew, but to a dark below, the crawl space the locket had once rattled over. The air that came up was cold and thin and tasted like salt and mirror. Rowan angled his body between me and the dark without blocking the view. The key sat in the lock like an invitation and a dare. After you, he said, which wasn't gallantry. It was consent. And somewhere in the glass above, the ward did a small, bright listening I felt in my teeth. Dawn came like someone apologized for being late and then kept talking. The surf line wore a bruised silver, the kind that makes gulls look like paper cutouts. I laced my boots tighter and let the cold wake the bones my shower hadn't reached. Training clothes this morning, charcoal leggings, salt green sports top under a light gray zip hoodie with thumb loops, hair braided into a crown so the wind couldn't get ideas. The locket sat where it always does, small, moon-cool, waiting. Rowan arrived with the Tithe, field jacket, dark Henley, hands bare to the cold like he didn't intend to be told what to feel. He didn't say good morning. He didn't have to. He set his feet in the sand and lifted 2 fingers, a spare motion that meant left stare even out here. "Show me," he said. "Bossy," I answered, but my mouth couldn't keep the smile out of the word. We started simple. 2 fingers, left stare. Palms sweep, fall back. 3 quick taps against the thigh, pivot. He checked my stance, nudged an elbow with 2 knuckles, thumb at my shoulder blade so I didn't hunch. When I moved right, he moved with me, the way a person learns your step count and quietly matches it. Chemistry and competence. No sparks thrown on purpose, just a clean, bright wire humming between 2 tasks. "Breathe," he said, placing his hand an inch from my ribs so I could feel the beat without being pressed into it. I said. "Better," he said. We built a tiny language that didn't need a mouth to work. He'd flick his wrist and my body would understand angle, not square. He'd tick his chin at the horizon and I'd find the line where wave becomes instruction. I mirrored him quick enough that the corner of his mouth did a private thing, half pride, half surprise at his own pleasure. We paused by the wreck pole. The faded red scarf we'd knotted last night lifted and dropped like a heartbeat trying to find itself. "I act," he said, voice pitched low, honest in a way that cost him a little. "I'm learning to explain." I let my thumb graze the locket because the body likes small rituals when the heart is asked to make new ones. "Explain with me," I said, softer. "Not at me." He nodded like I'd handed him a tool he didn't know he wanted. "With you," he said. Wind cut, we moved. He taught the hand signals until they lived in my wrist, then made me call them. I set the tempo. He followed. When he circled behind me to drag my heel half an inch, his breath touched the back of my neck for a second, warm through the braid, and the old, steady ache flared. "Hello, yes, still here." I kept my shoulders down and the sea in my lungs because a heart can learn 2 things at once. By late morning, the light pretended to be normal. We followed a warded path that threads the scrub above the bluffs. On the map, it looks like nothing, meanders and corrections, but the ground knows the line. Step a foot wrong and the air feels different, like a room that didn't invite you. "Who kept these?" I asked, towing a flat stone carved with a spiral so faint you could miss it. "Families," Rowan said. "People who were told they were too small to be histories. They kept them anyway." I glanced at him from under the hood brim. "You starting to like telling me things?" He didn't smile. His eyes did. "I like you seeing." We cut back toward the lighthouse in time to see Lucian come down from the road, coat open, throat bare to the crooked light. He carried a small portfolio and the kind of patience that tells you he already gave up his temper to a better god. "Rhea," he said. My name in his mouth always sounds like the first measure of a song, and I hate that it feels nice. "Rowan." He set the portfolio on the low wall and fanned out sigil cards, graphite sketches of the lens lattice. If I try to explain this with words, I will be punished with poetry. Better to draw. We took it to the lee side of the lighthouse, where the wind had to ask permission. Lucian stood close enough that I could feel the warmth off him without getting touched. He elevated one card to my eye line and tilted my chin with 2 fingers, gentle, clinical, consent telegraphed in the space he left to withdraw. "Breath is directional," he said. "So is consent. Exhale toward the cut, not at it like you're fogging a secret to read it." "Like I did over the ledger," I said. "Yes." His mouth did a shape that might have been pride if he hadn't been so careful. Rowan watched, there and not in the best way, hands in his pockets, weight set wide, attention like a net he cast over us and the road and the path all at once. When Lucian adjusted my wrist again to narrow the line of breath, Rowan stepped half behind me and spread his fingers in the air at hip height. his hand signal for steady, to me, not to Lucian. He wasn't jealous. He was making sure I had language to say if I wanted to step away. It would be simple to love him for that. I refused simple. We worked sigils until graphite found my skin. Lucian's voice took a different shape after the third card, quieter, older, a vowel dragged through a memory. "I knew your mother," he said, and the world tilted a degree which felt like a mile. Not a lover's confession. Not quite. "She asked me to watch the Ashwood line from far enough that it wouldn't stain you. We made a pact. I have not always been the man you see. She did not always trust that I wouldn't make the wrong kind of choice under the wrong moon. So I promised her two things. I would never turn a living soul, and if she died before the city mended its ward, I would put the locket in the hands of the one who could wake it." My mouth found a bitter shape I didn't own. "And you did that how? With a crane and a well-timed fog." "I watched," he said, and didn't apologize for the violence of that verb. "I waited. I kept doors open for your work when men with county badges tried to close them. I sent a crate to a clinic at a time you needed the grant papers to outnumber the debts." He looked away, briefly, toward the sea. "There are ways to help without claiming the credit." "What did she ask you not to tell me?" I asked, because if we were going to be brave today, I wanted it all. "That the ward would wake when you told it the truth," he said. "She feared if you learned young you would spend your life buying other people's lies and calling it duty." Wind pushed a tear out of my eye exactly because I didn't want to cry. I blinked it hard away and set the card down on the wall with care. "Thank you," I said, which wasn't the whole sentence. The rest, for failing her, for saving me, for still being here, stayed under my tongue because gratitude is a beast that bites if you pet it wrong. Lucian inclined his head, small, as if to say he knew which words I didn't want to teach my mouth. We walked the warded paths until the day limped toward night. Kids cut across the square in pairs, beanies low, hands stuffed into pockets. Shoulders doing that performative shrug that says we're not cold. At the clinic, the wolf dog raised his head and gave me a look that belonged to a prince who'd been asked to sleep under a bridge. I refreshed the water bowl and adjusted the splint. He accepted the service like he hadn't decided long ago he'd do things only if he could call them his idea. Evening settled wrong. The city cooked dinner an hour late and pretended not to mind. I walked with Rowan past row houses with porch lights that didn't trust themselves. "You hear it?" I asked. "The missing piece," he said. "The way people try to fill it," I said. He glanced at me. "You keep trying to fill it with work. You keep trying to fill it with plans." He didn't argue. It felt like love, the kind that might deserve the word if it didn't hurt so much to aim at it. Night dropped its lid. Midnight isn't a time you need a clock for when the hushed moon is a thing that covers your mouth. The first pup tried to howl from the edge of the park, a bright, clean sound torn from a brand new throat, and the curse swallowed it like a coin. The pup tried again, smaller. A second pup joined, brave. Both notes died mid-lift. The sound of not sound is worse than any scream. We went because we are the kind of people who go. The pack house yard held a half-dozen pups and twice as many adults trying to make their faces safe. Rowan knelt without ceremony and let a boy with ears too big for his head lean into his chest. He didn't speak. He pressed the boy's head to his sternum and breathed so slow and steady the kid learned the shape of it by osmosis. I found a girl with a lopsided ponytail and showed her how to put her fingers over her throat and hum so she could feel the note her mouth couldn't make. Her eyes went huge like she'd been given a secret, and she practiced it until she felt brave again. There's a kind of pain that makes a room polite. We stood in that politeness and didn't ask it to be anything else. When I looked up, Rowan was watching me. Not the brave, generous watching a leader does in public, the private, terrible kind that memorizes how your mouth tightens when you don't allow yourself to cry. We didn't kiss. We didn't move. It felt like someone had kissed the inside of my ribs and then apologized for their mouth. When the pups were tucked and the adults were done pretending they didn't need to sit for a minute, we took the road to the lighthouse again. The key burned a soft coin heat through denim as if the ward had been holding it in its teeth. "Ready?" Rowan asked at the vestibule, like we hadn't already chosen each other's company 14 times today. Stay with me, I said. It was easy to say now. It belonged to our bodies like sand in the cuffs. We stepped into the stair throat. The iron remembered our hands. Up top, the lens room made the sound of glass wanting to be more than glass. The locket started a small vibration at my throat, a shiver like a cat deciding if your lap is a home, and I stopped dead because that's the only way not to trip over a prophecy. What? Rowan said, instantly, already a half step closer so if I fell I'd hit him first. The locket, I said. It's hearing something. I held it between thumb and forefinger and let it swing on its chain. It pulled minutely, not north, not the lens, but down, toward the space between the last stair and the wall. There was nothing there but paint and brine and the idea of an edge. Light, I said, and Rowan's phone beam cut a clean stripe along iron. There, so thin my eye almost chose not to believe it, a seam. A hairline around what looked like a maintenance plate rusted the color of old blood. I crouched, braced my shoulder against the rail, and traced the seam with my nail. The locket warmed with approval like I'd said the right word to a stubborn dog. Knife, I asked. Rowan produced a multi-tool, of course he did, and handed it over without telling me how to hold it. I eased the flat blade into the seam and felt the resistance of something that hadn't wanted to remember being a door. It didn't give. I closed my eyes, exhaled the way Lucian taught me, toward the cut, not at it, and the iron answered like breath fogging a winter window. Consent, I whispered stupidly. It wants permission. From you, he said, not as flattery, as observation. I slipped the blade again. The seam sighed. A hidden latch clicked under my hand, not metal, more like a glass kiss, and a lower crawlspace revealed its mouth. Thin, black breathing salt. Rowan angled in, body making a wall I could choose to lean on without being pressed into it. After you, he said, and the locket thrummed like a string plucked once. We slid through sideways, shoulders brushing stone, boots finding the ladder rungs by feel. The space opened after 3 steps into a narrow shelf under the chamber we'd found last night, a secret under the secret. The air was colder here, cleaner, like a cellar someone keeps for offerings. In the floor, half lost to silt and the glitter of old mirror dust, lay another hinged panel the size of a man's ribs. The locket's hum climbed into my teeth. It wanted. The glyphs along the rim glowed the barest ghost, lines thin as veins. Behind us, the wind rolled along the stair in a sound that wasn't quite a voice. Lucian's shadow, long, neat, fell across my boots as he arrived at the mouth of the opening, voice spun down to velvet low so the room would forgive him. Your lighthouse has very modern ideas about secrets. And consent, I said, because my mouth refuses to let go of a theme once it's wearing it like a dress. Rowan crouched opposite me, palms on the iron, forehead bent as if he were listening through bone. On you, he said. Your call. I threaded the locket's chain through my fingers until the pendant rested in my palm. I exhaled toward the seam. The panel shivered in place like a held breath deciding. Together, I said, habit now, and looked up so both men could see me asking. Rowan set his hand beside mine. Lucian didn't touch the panel, only the air above it, a parallel gesture that made one door ask 2 different nights for permission. The hidden stair beneath the panel swung inward on a hinge so silent it felt like a thought finishing. Cold air rose from a throat of stone. My body swayed. Rowan's hand bracketed the space just off my hip, steady without touching, gravity with manners. Below, Lucian murmured, eyes gone bright the way old creatures get around a rule they can finally see all of. Where the contract keeps its teeth. The lighthouse listened. The city did, too. And I, stubborn, breath in counted 4s, locket hot in my palm, leaned into the dark with the quiet certainty of someone who finally understands what the next step is for. The hidden stair breathed salt as it opened, the metal shivering under my palm like it hadn't been asked to remember in 100 years. Rowan angled his body between me and the drop without blocking the view, consent made into a stance. After you, he said. Stay with me, I answered, and the locket at my throat thrummed once as if it could nod. We slid down sideways, shoulders brushing cold brick, boots feeling for rungs our eyes couldn't see until the dark turned into a narrow shelf. Below us, another hatch, half sunk in mirror grit, a mouth the size of a rib cage. Lucian's shadow stretched across the entry as he arrived at the opening, coat hem whispering stone. "Your lighthouse," he murmured, velvet voice turned low, "has opinions." "So do we," I said, because my mouth refuses to leave a room without a spine. I threaded the locket chain through my fingers until the pendant warmed my palm. Breath to seam, the way Lucian taught me, toward the cut, not at it. The hatch shivered. A glacis latch released. Cold air rose from the throat below. We dropped into a wedge-shaped chamber that felt like the underside of a heartbeat. The walls were brick skinned in glass, the mirror lattice, inset like a second architecture. Even dull, it was beautiful. Thin, etched lines that only become language if you're willing to stand very still. The locket pulsed, 3 beats. The lattice answered lightless, yet not dark, bringing the etching into relief, blood of wolf, blood of night. Breath of thorn, I didn't touch. I held my palm a breath off the glass, that almost prayer position my body knows without being taught. "There," Rowan said quietly at my shoulder. He wasn't pointing at the words. He was watching the lattice itself, the way a hunter watches the wind. Along one arc, barely thicker than a hair, a fault line ran from the lens support down into the glass-limbed brick, a place where the ward had been broken and then taught to forget. The true break. Not the lip service rituals above, the wound. "I thought the crack was decoration," I whispered. "Break lines rarely sing unless someone listens," Lucian said, close enough that his warmth touched the edge of my sleeve without crowding it. His daylight ring flashed a modest, earned shine. "This is where it was severed. This is where it can be seated again." The chamber wasn't empty. A niche cut into the lower wall, sealed with wax and a brass stamp, gave to Rowan's pocket knife with the sigh of old secrets. Inside, a tin the size of a palm, rusted, with a strip of hospital tape across the lid. Ashwood, personal in a scrawl that tilted hard the way my mother's hand did when she hurried. My throat misfired. I opened it because I couldn't not. Inside, photos, edges curled from damp. Not grand, unposed, wrongly lit Polaroids that remembered things we all promised not to. My mother stood at the lens door, hair in a plate, face turned away, the locket glinting at her throat like a practical star. Beside her, Ephra. Younger, yes, but unmistakable. Cable knit even then, a clipboard tucked to his ribs, head bent as if listening to the key she pressed into his hand. Another shot. Same night, the hush lilies crated in the vestibule like wedding favors. The lily emblem burned into the wood. Ephra's gaze lifted to the camera, caught mouth set in a line that wasn't unkind and wasn't kind. Behind him, at the margin, a crate rolled toward the stair with 2 dawns scrawled in grease pencil along the slat. The air left me without drama. I sat back on my heels and felt the cool through my jeans. "She trusted him," I said, and the sentence held more kinds of grief than breath should fit. "Or she wanted to." Lucian's hand hovered an inch from my shoulder and stopped there, steady without taking anything. A person can be useful and unworthy at the same time. Rowan didn't look away from the photos. He's been calibrating us since before we knew what the word was for. I tucked the pictures back like they were living. The locket warmed, a pulse that meant move. I lifted the mirror shard we'd seated last night and held it up to the fault line. It hummed in my palm like it wanted the job. When I hovered it near the seam, 3 paths faint-lit all the way to the lens struts. Wolf, night, thorn. "We'll need all 3, I said. "You have wolf," Rowan answered without arrogance. "He has night," he added, a nod toward Lucian, his mouth tilted, private. "You have thorn." "Thorn it is," I said, and the lattice gave a small, approving lean I felt in my teeth. We climbed back toward the spiral to check the vestibule, shard nestled by my heart, photos safe in an inner pocket. The stair moaned with the fatigue of old metal settling. At the landing, a low buzz bled through the lath, not the ward, an alarm wired old bell brass. Rowan lifted 2 fingers, left stair, and I moved into shadow. A shape detached from the gloom at the upper door, the beta from the council corridor, the one with the convenient camera and the 2 fast pockets. His face held the bored courage of men who hide behind orders. He didn't meet our eyes as he pulled the lever by the firebox and yanked the door wide. The first rogue hit the step like water finding a crack. Not fully shifted, wrong posture, wrong eyes, rag-wrapped wrists and boots meant for city streets. Then a second. 3. A flood. "Back," Rowan said, a palm sweep. A quiet word, no panic, and set himself as a stop where the stair pinches. He didn't swing to hurt. He deflected and placed, turning their momentum into a sit, a slide. A breath banged out against a rail. "No throats," he'd told his people last time. He lived it now. Lucian moved like a page turning, smooth, precise, cutting grabs before they landed, refusing every opening their bodies offered with the kind of control that makes choosing look easy. I took the side rail and moved pups. 2 were tucked behind the landing pump, eyes wide, hands over their mouths because they'd learned last night that sound can be stolen. "Hands on the rail," I said, voice the steady you build on purpose. "Breathe like you're sipping. 1 step, 1 more." We made it down 1 flight before the world got thin. A teen Omega Cal, sweet-eyed, shoulders still deciding if they were going to be broad or stay narrow, came up behind us with 2 smaller kids clamped to his jacket. "I got him," he said, voice pitched to brave. He did. For 3 steps he did. Then a rogue's boot found Cal's shin. Cal's knee buckled, the landing shook, the younger pup lost his handhold and grabbed for air. Cal didn't bounce. He shifted his body, took the hit, and used the fall to wrap the pup with his torso, turning so his back met stone. It was soft as far as falling goes. Soft as choices go. Not a scream. A sound knocked out of a body that had decided where to put itself and did not regret it. We landed in a spill of jackets and elbows. Cal's breath fought. He blinked at me like he thought he was in trouble and didn't want to be. "Good," I told him, palm to his cheek. "Good choice." Rowan and Lucian held the line above, quiet violence that read as competence, not spectacle. The beta who'd tripped the alarm hovered at the top step, pale under his excuse. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking down the stair like he was waiting for a specific face to appear. "Go," I told the pups, a handshove small enough to be permission. "Down, then out. Follow the wall." Cal's breath stuttered. I eased him onto the landing bench and checked for breaks with fingers that could tell the story of bones without making a show of it. No blood the room needed to see. No angles that shouldn't be. But inside, that quiet wrong that tells you a body paid a cost it didn't put on a ledger. He caught my wrist when I tried to stand. Not pain, urgency. His fingers scrabbled at his jacket lining, found a cloth-wrapped something and pressed it into my palm. A mirror shard, smaller than mine, edges sanded with care. "For the lens," he whispered, like he'd been carrying this for the person who would know what to do with it. His mouth tried to make a grin. It made something more honest. "Tell my mom I." "You will," I said, because lies should be soft when they're love. He closed his eyes like I had given him permission to do something he needed. I tucked the shard into my inner pocket beside the photos. When I looked up, the landing clock, one of those yellowed things with a hand that sticks between minutes, stuttered at 2:11. The ward somewhere above and all around touched Rowan as if it had reached down through stone to lay one cool palm to his throat. His alpha mark, the old scar that had been a claim and a burden, flickered and then guttered like a candle deciding whether it wanted to live. He didn't break stride. He didn't even blink. He lifted a hand, the sign we'd made for pivot, and his line moved as if one person were thinking for 10 bodies. No, listening for them. "Rowan," I called up through the noise, not to warn him. He didn't need it, but to anchor the moment so the city would remember. He placed the last rogue onto his seat like a teacher ending a fight he'd refused to call a fight in the first place. "Out," he told his men, hand signal already halfway to fall back. "Keep families together, 2 on the pump, no chases." My orders didn't save him, he said to me across the landing, raw and even at once, eyes on Cal. No theatrics. No blame thrown at the nearest throat. "My listening will save the rest." "Then I'll speak," I said, because that's our contract, too. "And you'll hear." "I will," he said, and the ward's spiteful old holy leaned. Sirens city, not packs spooled up from the road like a ribbon pulled too fast. In the vestibule, a dozen torches flared. counsel hands and good neighbors alike, because people like to hold light when they don't know where to put their fear. Ephra's voice, amplified by the shape of the hall, climbed the stair with perfect grief. "Please," he called, not shouting because he never needs to. "There has been violence in the lighthouse. We will convene now so no more rumors devour our daylight. A public hearing immediately. We owe the city clarity." He sounded like a man who had just discovered tragedy and wanted to help you file it. He stood at the lip of the vestibule like a conductor, wire frames catching torchlight, folio at his side. Behind him, neighbors in coats over pajamas, council jackets, one grandmother still carrying the candle she'd brought to the vigil. Rowan looked to me, not for permission, for agreement. I nodded, because if we didn't walk into this room under our own legs, Ephra would carry our silence in and dress it however he liked. I touched Cal's cheek one more time and tucked his hand over his jacket like sleep. "I'll come back," I told him, and meant it in all the ways time might let me. Lucian's shoulder brushed the doorway as we reached the bottom step. A benediction withheld, his ring dimming once as if the ward had drawn daylight from it politely, and then given it back with thanks. "Breathe like you intend to win," he said to me, very low. "I intend more than that," I said, and the locket warmed as if the ward were taking notes. We stepped into the vestibule light. Sirens stitched the road. Torches burned. Ephra opened his hands like welcome and verdict at once. "Ms. Ashwood," he said, voice kind enough to bruise. "For the record." At 2:11 a.m., the stair clock stuck between minutes like it couldn't bear to move forward. We carried candles into the vestibule because hands need work when mouths have no song. Rowan set 2 lanterns shoulder-high on the pump alcove so the wind made a low halo, not a spectacle. Lucian stood in the arch where the salt keeps flies away, coat open, throat bare, ring dim as if the night had drunk from it and left a tip. We kept a vigil for the boy who put his body where fear wanted a gap. Cal. We said his name as if it were a cup we passed, careful not to spill. I read the list slow, not solemn, because grief hates theater. "Cal Benton," I said, and the hush lilies in the planter didn't dare breathe. A grandmother I know from spay days slipped her candle into his mother's shaking hand. Rowan's palm hovered at the small of my back, never touching, steadying my breath by proximity alone. We held the room minute by minute until 4:00. No speeches, only small truths. The jacket he'd outgrown but refused to give up. The way he corrected kids, wrist angles when they tied shoelaces. How he'd learned Rowan's 2 fingers left stare signal because boys like to belong to languages. When the last wick cupped itself into smoke, I crossed to his mother and said the only sentence that won't break your teeth. "I am so sorry." She pressed her grief into my shoulder, vibrating with the effort of not wailing, and I let it shake me because the body can hold more for others than it thinks. We cleaned wax with coins and pocket knives. Lucian left 3 inches of apple sweet candle at the base of the stair, where the hidden latch had learned my name and stepped away before anyone told him thank you. Rowan moved through the room not as Alpha, but as a person, picking up drips, righting a bench, handing a coat to a woman who'd forgotten the night didn't love her back. "Sleep," he said after the last family left, his voice a steady low that felt like flannel. 2 hours, then work. "Work," I agreed, because grief sharpened as a tool. Untempered, it just cuts the hand that holds it. 8:12 a.m. Clinic coffee. Bitter then better with the kind of milk we keep for bottle-fed kittens. I traded the black shell of night for a simple day. Soft black jeans, slate tee, denim shirt sleeves pushed to elbows, hair in a low pony, locket cool and visible. On the corkboard above the break table, I tacked butcher paper and drew 3 columns with a Sharpie, people. Paper. Places. Rowan arrived with a roll of painter's tape, a legal pad of roots, and the dead quiet humility of a man who knows his orders didn't save a kid. He didn't sit. He stood 3 steps back from the board with his hands loose and his eyes listening. Lucian came with a portfolio that had stopped pretending it was about art. He laid out the mirror rubbings from the ledger, a lattice of faint glyphs we'd coaxed from the margins with breath. He carried the Polaroids from the tin, where my mother's hand had written ASHWOOD, personal like a dare. He didn't put them on top. He looked to me first. On the wall, I said, and the locket warmed once like approval. All of it. We began to build an evidence web. I pinned the Healing Hands shell data, the incorporation address that belonged to a UPS store, the board of 3 names who shared a phone. Rowan taped his patrol map along the bottom edge and marked it with small green dots where the lily roots crossed the ridge. Lucian threaded string between Ephra's photocopied clarifications and the charity crates stamped with the lily emblem. I added the photo where Ephra took the key from my mother's hand. People, I wrote, and under it, Ephra Gray, advisor, right arrow, archivist, right arrow, keyholder, beta recorder, hallway, phone, works driver, yard 17, warehouse night crew 2 silhouettes, plate 9 T14JX. Paper, then, forged ledger, mirror glyphs, 2 Dawn's haiku, permit files, counseling supplies codes. Places, lighthouse steps, lens stairs, yard 17, warehouse row, creek bend. We worked in silence that wasn't empty. The wolf dog watched from his pen with the tolerant contempt of royalty. The clinic breathed. Kettle click, door chime, a neighbor picking up meds who saw the board and pretended she didn't. When my hand cramped, Rowan took the marker without commentary and wrote in his neat block. Beta payouts, column of dates with cash symbols and the phrase protocol filming beside too. He pinned the still we'd pulled from the hall camera, Beta's shoulder, phone half up, the telltale tilt. I checked the supply boxes for more string, and a small avalanche of donation paperwork slid like talus off the top shelf. A page tore free and skittered under the table like a fish trying to belong to the floor. I dropped to my knees, palm down, and caught it. Not city forms, charity invoice. In the tidy font that makes lies feel safe, counseling supplies unit 200. Description, care kits. The faint watermark, Hush Lily. Someone had labeled chemical muzzles as therapy kits and paid for them with condolence money. Sudden spark, I said, and slid it onto the board under paper. I circled counseling supplies hard enough to squeak the pen. There it is. Lucian leaned in, eyes gone flint. A word that laundered a weapon. Rowan looked at the circled phrase like it was a knot he could cut through with a choice. We've been polite, he said quietly. No more euphemisms in our house. He flipped his pad to a clean page. We make an index, words they used to hide, words we used to uncover. I nodded. We don't need louder, I said, voice steadier than coffee could earn. We need clearer. He lifted his gaze to mine, agreement without heat, an oath without a hand to hold. Then clarity is the command. We began translating every pretty word into its plain truth. Counseling supplies right arrow hush lily kits. Public safety exercise right arrow beta-led ambush. Red Tithe right arrow ritualized harm with no consent. Lucian added his own column. Regret right arrow control, precedent right arrow convenience. He wrote small, like a lawyer filing a motion with a god. By 3:10 p.m., the board had turned our quiet fury into a map. We updated the timeline along the bottom edge with green tape. 2:11 a.m. Cal 4:00 Vigil 8:12 Board 11:00 Roots 1:40 Invoice anchors to keep us honest about minutes. Rowan stepped back, weight even, eyes tracking the whole wall. If my voice fails me, he said, not dramatic, just true, we run by gesture. Shared command, you call moves, I echo, they echo me. If anyone gets cut from the sound. His jaw ticked once, barely. We don't lose the line. You're not losing your voice, I said. Maybe not, he answered. Maybe, either way the pack doesn't stall because my throat forgot us. He moved to the side of the board and lifted both hands where the wolf dog could see, which is how I knew he was thinking of pups first. 2 fingers, left stare, 3 taps, pivot, palm sweep, fall back, flat palm to heart, consent check. He looked at me for agreement. Not permission. Add open hand, 2 inches away for steady without touch, I said, and he nodded like I'd handed him a word he'd needed his whole life. Lucian watched, something like an old ache soft at the edges of his mouth. Language that does not require sound will outlive any tyrant, he said mildly. Also men with laryngitis. Optimist, I told him, because devotion to us looks better when it's teased. At 5:20, we fed ourselves like adults. Salt crackers, kettle soup, a pair we cut into even thirds and ate leaning over the sink. I checked the wolf dog's splint, and he suffered me with benevolent contempt. Rowan refilled mop buckets because floors notice. Lucian took the trash out without being clever about it. The evening crept in late again, dim syrup light, the city trying to pretend it could measure itself. We moved to the council porch at 7:30 with the board photos copied into a binder and a portable version clipped to foam, words large enough that anyone could read them without squinting or trusting us. People gathered the way they always do when they suspect the truth has arrived wearing a smaller jacket than a lie. Rowan set his stance one step behind my shoulder, not in my shadow, not on it. Lucian leaned an elbow on the rail like a man who knows how to listen in public. I spoke softly into the space, letting the clarity do the carrying. Not a speech, a list. Roots, a driver who never looks at you, a beta whose phone knows the time better than his conscience, counseling supplies that smell like lilies that teach throats not to sing. I held up the torn invoice. A ledger that turns to mirror when you exhale truth. A key handed to me under a prayer for safekeeping. I placed the Polaroid where my mother's plate and Ephra's clipboard could sit together without editing. Precedent that only asks for obedience when consent would do the job. Faces changed shape. Nods, tight mouths, fear that didn't want to be fear anymore. Rowan took the binder and turned the pages as I named them, his hands making our argument orderly. When I faltered on Cal, he lifted 2 fingers, our left stare, and I let the signal pull me one breath sideways into steadiness. Trial at dawn, a councilman huffed from the steps, trying to throw yesterday on us to keep from paying for today. No, I said, not this old play. I pointed to our column. Clarity is the command. We are not bleeding a basin because a margin note said please. A murmur, then a voice I would recognize under a collapsing roof. Ephra emerged from the hall built to flatter him, coat smooth, folio serene, glasses catching lamplight like small, polite suns. He lifted both hands in a gesture the city had learned to trust. Neighbors, he said, grief in his vowels without a single broken edge. We honor Cal. We honor all we've lost, and we do it by acting together, not fracturing under conspiracy boards and unkind conjecture. His gaze swept the foam with the gentleness of a man straightening flowers at a funeral. We do not abandon tradition on the night before it can save us. He set a printed notice on the porch rail as if it were a communion plate. Public read Tithe at dawn, moved up in accordance with archivist notes. He did not smile. He did not need to. The paper smiled for him. You could feel the room lean toward the easy thing. Relieve the tension by paying the wrong debt. I stepped forward before fear could practice being reasonable. You won our voices, I said, quiet enough that the porch had to hush to hear me. You don't get them by stealing them and calling it safety. Rowan didn't speak. He lifted a flat palm to his chest, our consent check where the crowd could see. Then on me, open hand 2 inches from my sleeve, steady. A vow written in air. Lucian's brow ticked at Ephra like a gentleman reminding another of his manners. Archivists preserve truth, he said, velvet iron. They do not edit it. Ephra's smile didn't fight. I will be at the lighthouse before first light, he said, the way men say I'll be on the steps of the church for a wedding they plan to ruin kindly. If you are right, Ms. Ashwood, the ward will answer you. He inclined his head, perfectly courteous. If I am right, it will forgive us. He tucked the notice under a rock, an old habit dressed as service, and walked down the steps through people who parted for him even when I could feel they didn't want to anymore. Neighbors peeled away in 2s and 3s, the late light lifting from coat shoulders like exhausted birds. The notice lay on the rail like a dare. Rowan touched the page with 2 fingers and didn't take it. We'll be there, he said, not to Ephra, who'd left, but to the city. He tilted his head toward me. And we'll be clearer. We don't need louder, I repeated for both of us. We need clearer. He nodded once. Then clarity is the command. The locket warmed under my shirt the way metal remembers the sun. I pressed my palm flat, not hard, to feel it choose me back. At 11:46 p.m., the porch lights blinked, power hiccup trying to keep the hour it owes us. The wind nosed at the hush lilies in the hall planters, and they kept their breath. Sirens were quiet. The city balanced on the lip of a word it hadn't decided to say. "Dawn," Lucian said softly, eyes on the lighthouse crown gone dark and dangerous. "We answer." "Wolf," Rowan said, his palm to heart. "Night," Lucian returned, a fingertip to his dim ring. "Thorn," I said, the locket a small sun against my skin, and lifted my chin to the wind as if it had asked me a question, and I'd finally learned how to give it the truth. By 11:46 p.m., the cliffs had stopped pretending to be land and gone back to being teeth. I swapped day skin for night work, storm gray shell, black leggings, thermal beneath, hair in a tight braid tucked into my hood, boots laced hard. The locket sat moon cool against the hollow that panic likes. Rowan ghosted up the steps from the beach access in his field jacket and dark Henley, rope coiled across his chest like a sash. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He checked my harness once, careful, the way a person inspects a truth they plan to lean on. Lucian arrived last, coat unbuttoned, daylight ring a modest star on his hand, a canvas roll under his arm, chalk, salt, mirror shard, Tide's chart creased to confession. We walked the ledge single file, backs brushing stone, the sea below gnawing at the cliff as if it owned a grudge. Our headlamps stayed off. We moved on memory and the thin silver the hushed moon had left us. The sea cave mouth opened where the surge undercut the rock, black, breathing. Inside, the world shrank to cold stone, salt, and the small radius our palms could learn by touch. We worked by feel and care. Lucian unrolled chalk and salt. Rowan paced the rim of the basin rock, counting under his breath, a habit he didn't realize he had until I matched him. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, so the water's pulse and ours could handshake. "Here," I said, choosing a flat shelf above the surge line, high enough to risk timing, low enough to matter. I drew a salt circle whose seam pointed seaward, then chalked the lattice we'd copied onto butcher paper. 3 mouths, 3 paths, wolf, night, thorn. The mirror shard went at the throat of the diagram, edged toward the fault only we could see by memory. Lucian crowned the center with his ring, set in a shallow bowl of brine. It glimmered faintly as if remembering warmer summers. He removed his hand with the ceremony he reserves for real vows and nothing else. "If this accepts," he said, voice velvet low, "I will be night-bound until the ward gives back what it stole, perhaps longer." Rowan met his eyes. There were 100 old grudges possible in that look. He offered none. He set a palm to his chest, consent check, and then to the chalk, flat and steady. "With us," he signed, 2 fingers left stare toward me. The corner of his mouth almost smiled. He was letting me call it. "Begin," I said, because the ward likes verbs. 12:22. I breathed the way Lucian taught toward the cuts, not at them. The salt did a kind of listening. The chalk lines brightened with a dull fishbelly shine, then steadied into thin veins of light. The bowl of brine trembled. The daylight ring should have dropped like a coin. It didn't. It floated, a second, a breath, as if weighing what sort of god it was dealing with. Then it dropped slow and settled, the light in it dulling to a soft pewter. Sacrifice accepted. The cave air changed, the way a room changes when 2 people stop pretending and start telling the truth. The mirror shard hummed under my palm, a hairline sheen traced from its tip into the chalk and out toward the ocean. For 3 breaths, I believed we'd tricked the tide into borrowing our conscience. Then the counterspell arrived. It didn't come like a flash. It came like a permission revoked, a low hum through the stone that set my molars on edge and made the chalk lines run backwards, pulling light from the sigil into the rock. The salt circle crizzled as if someone had dragged a nail across it from far away. A pressure pushed through the cave, not wind, not water, the feel of the lens being aimed by a hand that had learned our names. "Ephra," Lucian said under breath, as if the cave itself didn't like to hear it. Rowan shifted, one hand to the wall, body between me and the surge without smothering me. He opened his mouth to call a pivot, and a noise came out that wasn't a voice. His breath caught. He tried again. Sound failed him like a bridge steps shy of the far bank. No pain, no blood, just absence. A thin, dark line lifted under his skin at the base of his throat and settled there like a brand drawn in frost. He blinked once, perfect calm around a new truth, and signed instead, 3 taps at his thigh clean, pivot. His eyes told me the rest. I'm here. We adapt. "On me," I said, so the cave would know I was agreeing to my own orders. We closed the circle by breath alone. We leaned into the chalk's memory. I blew narrow and sure along the thorn path. Lucian steadied the night arc with a palm hovering, not touching. Rowan's fingers traced wolf in the air, muscle memory giving the ward something to read. It almost held. Then the tide surged, 12:33 on my phone face, a mocking glow, and the cave decided we were finished. Water shouldered into the chamber, cold and alive. The first slap soaked my knees and tried to turn me sideways. Rowan's palm flashed open at my hip, steady, not touching, permission if I needed it. I needed it. I leaned into the space his hand made without falling into him. Lucian scooped the ring bowl and the shard with a sleight of hand I couldn't afford to compliment. The bowl's water hissed. The ring lay dull, heavy. "Path 3, I said, loud enough for my own bones, and cut right into a notch we'd scouted at low tide hours before, minute count puzzle time, the kind where panic eats air faster than the body can borrow it. Rowan went first because he is all angles and consequence. He checked the footing, then 2 fingers back at me, left, so I would aim the next step where he'd made room. The notch funneled into a crooked corridor, roof low, barnacles like old alphabets scraping our sleeves. The water chased and caught ankles, then calves. "Pocket," Lucian said behind me, the way a man says hope when he's pointing at a dark air space between rock teeth. I put my face to it and pulled 3 good breaths that tasted like pennies and miracles. We moved on heartbeats. 1, Rowan braced the rope, sign for fallback ready if a wave argued. 2, I called left over a submerged ridge, right at a smooth channel that would have stolen us whole. 3, Lucian steadied my shoulder, not to hold me, but to convince my feet they were allowed to trust. A sudden spark lit the wall when our headlamps flicked. Fine algae woke under the film of fresh fracture, a river of bioluminescence tracing the path the counterspell had pushed. Lovely and treacherous. It pointed everywhere but safety. "Ignore the pretty," I said. "Hug the old scar." We followed the places where barnacles had lived long lives. New light is a liar. The tide shouldered again, higher, colder. We slid belly to stone across a lip, Rowan taking the hit so my ribs didn't. Then he rolled and lifted me by the strap at my shoulder like I weighed a decision he'd already made. He didn't need a voice to be a shifter alpha. The command lived in how he made room, and how he listened when I said stop with my own palm open in air. Another pocket. I kissed it with noisy gratitude. Lucian was breathing too fast, controlled by sheer arrogance, the ring dull in his fist. "Go," I told him, hand to his chest, not pushing, reminding. He shook his head once, pride, habit, then found the muscle to obey. When he came back from the pocket, his voice was hoarse, scraped thin by salt and magic. "I'll walk the night," he said, almost a laugh that hurt. "So you may keep your day." "Accepted," I said. We weren't doing poetry, we were paying. The passage shrank. Our rope snagged a barnacle ridge. For a heartbeat, the 3 of us were a single stubborn thing, human knot against water. Rowan 3-tapped, pivot, and I understood. Change the order or drown. I slid past him, took the lead into a low squeeze a kid might love and adults shouldn't, called left then down then hold with a palm that shook and still worked. At the last bend the world narrowed to a ridiculous choice between an impossible squeeze and a stone mouth that would happily make us rumor. I closed my eyes and felt for the locket's heat. It pulsed once, then again, pointing not out, but up at a seam of darkness that wasn't a shadow, air. "Up on me," I said. "One at a time." Rowan boosted. I caught a handhold I couldn't see. Lucian's boot found my thigh, then the stone, then we were stacked like a lousy totem and somehow through. The cave exhaled. We spilled into a taller chamber with a ceiling of black glass, the sea's cough echoing. My phone stuttered 4:52 and then died, damp lie. We didn't need it. There's a way the tide tells you when it plans to stop being your enemy long enough for you to crawl over its shoulder and leave. "Almost," I breathed. Rowan's hand pressed the air by my sleeve steady, and I pressed my own palm to his chest, consent check, because he deserved the same manners we'd given the ward. We took the last shoot on elbows and forgiveness. The seam of light ahead was not sunrise, it was just less dark. The lip chewed our shins and spit us into the mouth where the cave meets the world. We stood there hunched and shaking. Gray dawn tried and failed to be morning. The city had lost another thin slice of itself, dimmer again. We climbed to the ledge and crouched under the lee of rock to listen to our own hearts change shape. Rowan rolled to sit, back to stone, head tipped, throat line showing the thin dark brand where his voice had been taken. I reached for him and stopped an inch off his skin. Habit, respect. He took my wrist and set my palm to his sternum, and the room in my ribs found room again. "I'll be your voice," I said, quiet into the wind, "until yours returns." He nodded once, slow, a vow answered without the cruelty of proof. He signed left stare, 2 fingers, toward the path home, then fall back for a breath, because bodies like 1 minute to be human after they've remembered they can die. Lucian knelt by the ledge, the ring cupped in his palm like a coin that used to be mint. It didn't glint. He turned it and turned it again as if some angles had learned to lie. "I wondered if it would break," he said, voice roughened into brandy. "It did something worse, it obeyed." "We'll make obedience the wrong tool," I said, and the wind took the sentence and put it somewhere it could use later. We started down the goat path in a 3-beat that had become our music. Rowan signals. I speak, Lucian steadies, and let the cliff put distance between us and the cave that had tried to teach us humility by drowning. By the time we reached the lot, the city had remembered how to be a place you can stand without bargaining with water. My phone rebooted like a sulky child and immediately learned a new trick. Ping, council bulletin. Then another, and another, neighbors forwarding what the square would be gossiping by breakfast. Public forum, noon today. Location, council hall steps. Topic, lighthouse disturbance and red tithe scheduling. Speaker, Ephra Gray, archivist counselor. All are welcome. Clarity will be provided. Lucian's mouth flattened the way a blade does when it sees a whetstone it doesn't trust. Rowan read over my shoulder, jaw settling into a line that meant we answer. "We'll be there," I said to the screen, to the square, to the ward that had accepted one offering and stolen a voice. Rowan lifted his hand, flat palm to heart, so the morning could see. Then he signed with you across the little space between us, an old military gesture he'd taught me and probably thought I hadn't kept. "With you," I said aloud, locket warm, the day a shade too dim and hours to fix. Morning came in the color of unsweetened tea. I dressed for weather and for a crowd that would try to read me like a verdict. Straight-leg black jeans, a soft white button-down tucked clean, my forest green utility jacket cinched at the waist, the locket visible, cool where a pulse belongs. Hair in a low braid, boots buffed but still themselves. Rowan waited outside the clinic with 2 paper cups that steamed like an apology. Field jacket, dark Henley, rope-veined forearms bare to the chill, that new quiet around his throat where the brand lived, a thin shadow that said don't count on sound. He didn't try. He lifted a hand instead, 2 fingers, small flick left stare in greeting. It looked like nothing if you didn't speak our language. It felt like everything if you did. "Good," I said, taking the cup, and because I know how his eyes check me for tells, I let my right shoulder roll once and settle. "I'm fine. Don't hover." Lucian joined us by the square, coat open, daylight ring dulled to pewter. He studied the sky as if it might confess. "The city's pretending to be late on purpose," he said, and it sounded like humor until you tasted the ache behind it. The square filled by degrees, neighbors in coats over pajamas, council jackets, a knot of pack teens standing tall in borrowed seriousness. Pups leaned against their elders' legs. The hush lilies in planters watched like polite spies. We staged quiet, not dramatic. I clipped the foam board to the rail where anyone could read. Rowan moved through the crowd, setting people where the space would hold them, palm open for steady without touch, flat hand to his chest for the consent check, 3 quick taps against his thigh when a lane needed a pivot. No voice, no problem. The pack watched, unconsciously mirroring posture, shoulders relaxing because his said "we've got this." A little boy, cap pulled down to his eyebrows, watched Rowan's hands as if they were a storybook. When Rowan lifted 2 fingers at a side stare, the boy's small hand flashed the same left stare back, perfect. His mother startled. The boy grinned like he'd learned the secret word to open a door. Sudden spark, I murmured, smiling before I could help it. Language wants to live, Lucian said, pleased. Then Ephra stepped onto the hall porch, and the crowd took a single, collective breath like a wave, deciding whether to rise. He dressed like comfort dresses itself, cable knit the soft gray of folded rain, wire frames, folio tucked in the crook of his arm like a hymn book. He lifted his hands, the movement gentle enough to lower a storm. Neighbors, he said, and the square obeyed. Grief lived in his vowels without cracking a single consonant. We will not let fear drive us from what has always saved us. We will not let unkind speculation divide us. We will hold to tradition. We will together perform the red tithe at dawn tomorrow, and we will do it with love. Love as a leash. You could feel people lean because leaning is easier than standing. I didn't raise my voice. I don't like shouting. The ward doesn't either. We brought clarity, I said, and lifted the first page. Roots, invoices, a charity shell that stamps lilies as counseling supplies, a ledger that turns to mirror when truth touches it. I held up the Polaroid where my mother's plate and Ephra's clipboard shared a doorway. A key given into his hand on the night my mother died. Faces changed shape, fear finding edges, not just noise. Rowan stood one step behind my shoulder, not on it. He turned the binder pages as I named them, hands steady, body making a clean frame for the evidence. When my breath miscounted at Cal's name, his palms skimmed the air near my sleeve, steady, and I found the measure again. Ephra didn't interrupt. He received my sentences the way a tree receives wind. When I finished, he stepped forward one pace, enough to be intimate, not enough to crowd. There is pain, he said softly. We share it, and when a city hurts, it must agree, not scatter into 10 different kinds of good intentions. He slid the folio open and lifted a square of cloth, pale as a petal. Allow me, he said, voice tender, to honor. He lifted the cloth and laid it against his cheek like a man drying rain. The fabric drank light, then, without gore, without drama, changed. Not flesh-tearing, no horror film. A shimmer passed through his features, soft as a ripple through curtains, and when it cleared the face looking out from his bones was Cal. Not perfect, not alive, an echo made of light and old glass. The weight of it hit the square like dropped stone. Gasps, then a sound more dangerous than a scream, 100 throats deciding to close. A mother covered her mouth, another reached toward Ephra as if he were the boy. No, I said, small and sharp. No. I took one step down into the square so my body broke the sightline. You don't get to wear our dead to sell us your cure. Ephra did not flinch. He let the cloth fall back to gray, his own features returned, composed. I meant comfort, he said, and there were people in the crowd who wanted to believe him because grief is heavy and he offered to carry it. Panic began to ripple, shoulders hunching, eyes warming to tears no one had asked permission to shed. This is where crowds break and governments write rules about it later. Rowan moved before the panic learned its own legs. Hands up, open, calm, consent check to the whole square, then 2 fingers slicing left, palms sweeping back, signals flowing through him like a river we could walk. I raised my voice only enough to translate. Left lane, make room. Parents with pups, your left stair. Elders with canes, center bench, will bring chairs. A teenager translated my words into motion with his body. 2 more copied him without being told. The pack learned the language because it wanted to. Lucian took one side, voice velvet low, giving the embarrassed their dignity. He touched shoulders the way a doctor touches, brief, certain. This way, you're not in trouble. It's simply more comfortable over here. He said comfortable like he meant it, and people let themselves be arranged. The square steadied. The hush lilies rustled themselves into silence. Ephra watched it all with eyes that did not miss mirrors. Impressive, he said quietly to me, not into the mic. But choreography will not replace order. He lifted his hands again for the square. We gather at first light. We save what can be saved. I felt the locket heat under my shirt as if the word save insulted it. The lighthouse answered from 3 streets away, so faint no one else might catch it, the lens letting go a hum that found the fillings in my teeth and the hinge behind my ear. Not a warning. A count. Lucian tilted his head. Do you hear it? Yes, I whispered. The lattice. He closed his eyes a moment, listening the way old creatures listen when music remembers them. 3 nights, he said. Reverent and matter-of-fact at once. King Tithe, that's the last best window. I felt it in my bones when he said it, the ward agreeing, the city drawing a circle around a future it could barely believe in. 72 hours, I breathed, and the locket gave 3 quick pulses that felt like yes. I stepped back onto the porch rail, the square looking up with that terrible hope cities wear when they're ready to be told the truth. I didn't sermonize. I didn't plead. I gave them the sentence my mother had kept like a seed in her mouth. Tradition is not a leash, I said, steady. It's a story, we choose the ending. Silence, the kind that's listening. Rowan behind me set a hand to his chest, consent check, then lifted 2 fingers for left stare, 3 taps for pivot, palm sweep for fall back. It wasn't for the square anymore. It was for me. I am with you. Choose. My throat tightened but the good way. I nodded once and the gesture passed into the pack like weather. Ephra tried one more move, and if I hadn't stood in rooms where men prettied harm into policy, I might have admired the craft. He opened his hands, palms visible, voice all balm. I am not your enemy, he said. I am your memory. I carry the book. I keep the rules. When grief is loud, I am the quiet that lets you rest. You're the quiet that teaches throats to close, I answered, soft. We're done closing. He inclined his head an inch, as if we had just negotiated a calendar change. Then we will convene at dawn, he said, and let the ward judge our love. He stepped back into the doorway and folded his folio with a small, satisfied click. The sound made me want to break something shaped like a rule. The crowd took itself apart gently. People touched shoulders on purpose. A grandmother told a teenage boy he'd done well by keeping his hands open. A little girl with a lopsided ponytail flashed left stare at me and beamed when I flashed it back. We didn't pretend the day was finished. We walked it. Clinic first. Copy the board, detour to give Cal's mother my number written again, so she wouldn't have to find it where grief hides practical things. Rowan replaced a porch bulb because small light is a kind of oath. Lucian coaxed a kettle into generosity and refilled everyone's mugs like we'd been rehearsing being a family for years. On the ridge path, wind ran its fingers through the scrub and the world war that held breath pause before weather changes its mind. Rowan pointed 2 fingers at the old stone stair down to the beach, left, then swept his hand, fall back, when sprigs of black blossom appeared by the rail, hush lily buds turning wrong, their throats shading from milk to soot. Noted, I said. The locket warmed like a cat deciding it liked me. Lucian crouched, not touching the plant, and watched the petals try to remember their color. He's tuning them, he murmured. Preparing the street the way a choir director prepares voices. So we bring our own choir, I said. No sound required. We returned to the square as the day leaned toward its last usable light. People out on stoops looked up. No one asked if we were all right. They'd learned that the better question is what's next. This, I told them, showing palms. 3 nights. We prepare routes, signals, supplies that aren't lies. We move without fear or flourish. If you don't know a signal, learn one. If you know one, teach 2. A pup, same cap, same eyes, stood and lifted his hand in the precise curve of steady without touch to the woman beside him. She nodded like she'd been handed a glass of water. The square relaxed by degrees into a readiness that had nothing to do with bravado. The first drop hit the back of my hand. I looked up. The sky had made its decision. Rain moved across the rooftops like a gray animal, quick and hungry. Lamps flicked on, neighbors produced lanterns from nowhere, flames cupped, glass rattling. Down the alley by the grocer, shadows organized themselves into lines, not crowds. The hush lilies in the hall planters opened their darkening throats and breathed sweetness like a lie. Rowan lifted his palm to his chest, consent check, and then 2 fingers left, 3 taps pivot. Lucian rolled his sleeves as if the night had asked him to dance, ring dull, mouth set. Lanterns up, I said, voice steady, rain finding the braid at my neck. No chases, we corral, we keep. The locket heated once, twice, a third time counting us in. Somewhere beyond the square, a whistle blew in the wrong key. Torches flared on the council steps. The street began to move, and we stepped into it, minute by minute, no gaps, no missed beats, ready to make clarity the command and the dark answer to our hands. Rain came in sheets, lantern light breaking it into falling threads. I zipped my storm shell to the throat, the locket cold coin on skin, and tied my braid tighter so the wind couldn't rewrite me. The square held its breath, then let it out as the first patrols moved. Rowan slipped to my left, field jacket gone darker with wet rope bandoliered across his chest. He didn't try his voice. The brand at his throat sat like a thin twilight. He raised a flat palm to his heart, consent check, and I answered with the same. Lucian eased up on my right, sleeves rolled, daylight ring dulled to pewter, coat hem lifting like a black sail when the gusts played at arrogance. We went. Lanterns swung low in careful hands. Glass chimed against rain. The hush lilies in the planters sweetened the air as if grief could be perfumed into good behavior. Down the first alley, two shadows tested a back door with more hope than skill. The pack teens we'd trained slid like water between them and the exit, open hands, steady without touch, one boy using his scarf to loop an attacking wrist, unwind, and place the hand back on a wall like a polite correction. Non-lethal, clean. A woman with a broom laid the bristle head across a shin. Tap, tap, a reminder instead of a punishment. The rogue muttered something about being late to the wrong party and let himself be steered toward the square. Left lane, keep moving, I called, low and clear. No chases, we corral, we keep. Above, rain brightened roof edges into knives. A man in a hood tried to hop the deli awning for the easy route. Lucian ghosted up the iron ladder 6 silent rungs and met him at the gutter. They crossed blades, not for blood, for choices. Lucian's knife kissed the man's wrist, then his belt, then the slick sole of his shoe. 3 touches, 3 surrenders, no cuts that would tell a story in a bad way later. The man sat, rain stunned, as if the roof had gently insisted on conversation. At the pharmacy corner, a knot of rogues tried to push panic into a door we'd propped on purpose. Rowan 3-tapped, pivot, and the line of us shifted as one body, a school of fish deciding the current didn't get to be in charge. 2 left stair signals followed, rapid, precise, sending pairs to flank without crowding anyone's breath. A grandmother did the consent check to a boy old enough to be dangerous if someone better paid for his excuses. He nodded once and put his hands behind his head like a person who had finally remembered he wanted to be somebody's son. We moved block by block under Lantern-Rain, a choreography of not hurting people who were trying to teach us that hurt was the only language that works. Rowan glided at my shoulder, eyes taking in angles the way the tide learns a harbor. He leaned close at a corner, breath warm through the storm and the closeness, his mouth near my ear. His lips formed the words, the whisper a shape, not a sound. 2 fingers left stare. Already on it, I said, and the answer steadied the locket's restless coin into heat. We turned the corner as one, me calling, Rowan signaling, Lucian covering the long lines. A pup on a stoop mirrored Rowan's 2-finger flick and grinned when a patrol echoed it back. Language wanted to live. A rogue in a soaked ball cap swung wild at me in the grocer's loading bay. I let the blow pass like bad weather, caught his sleeve with an elbow and turned his momentum into a sit on a crate. Breathe, I told him, as if I were handing him water. He glared, then blinked, then obeyed. It's strange how much people want to be given a better shape to move in. Somewhere downriver, 2 torches flared where torches shouldn't, a signal we'd agreed to read as misdirection. Ignore the pretty, I said into my collar, and Lucian's mouth twitched even now. He moved with 2 teenagers under the fire escape, showing them how to stand so a body reads as wall, not target. Rain cut along his cheekbone, he let it. The chase didn't feel like a chase after the first hour. It felt like teaching a city to use its own hands again. We worked non-lethal to a rule. Wrist weave, knee bend, ankle roll, a borrowed scarf to bind fingers to palm, not tight, just enough to make harm think twice. We ushered people out of bottlenecks and into lanes where they could choose to be better. Most did. The few who didn't found themselves placed gently against brick, with 2 open palms shown, then redirected by a broom with the dignity of 1,000 kitchens behind it. On a rooftop, the rain thinned to mist. I followed Lucian's wet boot prints across tar and gravel, Rowan's rope a lifeline at my hip. A figure stepped out near the neon sign of the Voss Motel sign. Coat wrong, stillness wrong, the polite posture of a man ready to sell you something because he had already stolen it. "Evening," Ephra said, the word as soft as a bedtime story told to someone who was never a child. He drew a blade that wasn't a knife. You could tell by the way the air moved around it. A sliver of polished lattice, edge tuned to obedience. Lucian's knife raised like grace in a good church. "Don't," I said to him, not forbidding, reminding. He inclined his head a millimeter, and it meant I know. They crossed blades, rain ticking against metal like a bad metronome. Ephra cut for tendons in the way a rules man does when he wants to disable, not destroy, because destruction makes more paperwork. Lucian refused to be precise the way cruelty demands. He chose deflections, empty parries, footwork that made Ephra do the ugly work and then look at it. At one slip, Ephra's shard nicked Lucian's palm, bright red blooming and washed at once to pink by rain. Lucian's pupils flexed, hunger like a bell rung far away, and he refused it, hand flexing open, blood in the storm becoming no one's meal. "I will not feed," he said, voice hoarse, blade steady, "even when you make it easy." Ephra's eyes did a quick, small smile that meant lesson noted. "Ever the gentleman," he murmured. He feinted toward me and found Rowan in the space instead, my body screened by his, not blocked, his left hand open where I could choose it. He didn't swing. He moved Ephra's arm into the angle where the human shoulder politely stops. Choice again. We deal in choice tonight. Ephra measured the math of losing this roof and didn't argue it. He stepped back 2 paces and gave a little courtroom bow that would have charmed a jury if they wanted to be charmed. "Another time," he said, rain making commas in the dark. "Not if we do our jobs," I said, too soft for him to sell later. We flowed off the roof, down the iron, across a yard where grass tried to be a lake. The patrol lines tightened as Dawn's absence grew weighty. We worked the route we'd drawn on our clinic paper and in the backs of each other's bodies. Warehouse Row to Yard 17, down Quarry Road, up the switchback by the wreck pole where our red scarf slapped itself into signals we hadn't taught it. Lanterns made constellations in windows. Neighbors watched with hands ready to help and minds ready to learn. A man with cold eyes and a City Works jacket peeled from the current near the rail yard and held his hands up higher than necessary. "I'm done," he said and meant it. "No more." He nodded at Rowan, at me, at the kid who'd looped his scarf into a textbook restraint before deciding not to use it. The man swallowed like he'd bitten the wrong word years ago and it had finally slid down. "There's a cache," he said. "Inside the lighthouse base, not the usual door, the plinth. You knock the right way and it gives you God's pocket." He winced. "He said don't call it that." "How?" I asked, because clarity is the command. He touched the iron rail with the back of 2 fingers, once, then twice, then a long press. "Like you're telling the door a secret you regret." He looked at me, not at Rowan, which is sometimes how men apologize to women without knowing they're doing it. "I drove the first crates. I didn't know, not at first. I know now." "Then help carry them out," I said. "Tonight we do keeping." He nodded, relief and shame fighting in his throat. Rowan angled his body so the man could choose to stand with us and still see a way out if fear woke up mean later. Choice again. Always choice. By the time the clouds pulled apart enough to pretend there might be a dawn hiding somewhere, we had the rogues contained in a curve of streets that natural flowed toward the lighthouse yard. Not trapped, herded by consent and consequence, a current formed of neighbors who had decided being good at their city mattered more than letting someone else be in charge of their fear. We corralled them through the lanes. Broom head tap here, palm open steady there, a boy's hand signal echoing from one corner to the next like a game of telephone that hadn't learned how to ruin itself yet. Lucian posted at the yard's north gate like a statue pretending not to be a vow. Rowan held the west line with a square of teens who'd earned his approval one signal at a time. I moved between knots, calling time and turns, trading breath for clarity and getting paid in steadiness. We took the last alley together, and the lighthouse yard opened, wet grass shining, the base of the tower ringed in planters stuffed with lilies that used to be the color of milk. The crowd's energy climbed in the way a city's does when it believes itself. Even the hush listened. "Hold your lines," I said low, and 100 bodies understood without translation. At the far end, Ephra stood under the vestibule arch, coat smooth, folio tucked, a leader who had come to reclaim his stage. He looked at our lines and read what I wanted him to read. A city that wouldn't be bullied into religion by a man who owns a photocopier. "Neighbors," he called, and the words slid over us like rain on old leather. "You did well." He smiled the way a counselor smiles when he plans to refer you to a program for your own good. "Let us finish it the right way inside." The works jacket man who had surrendered swallowed. "Plinth," he murmured, 3 taps and a press. "Later," I said, because the yard was a throat and anything we fed it now would become a story we couldn't control. Rowan lifted 2 fingers, left stare toward the vestibule. I nodded. We moved 3 paces, 4, letting Ephra think we were accepting choreography so he would tell us his favorite step. The hush lilies by the steps shifted, petals widening in the rain with a little sigh of victory that had nothing to do with plants. They darkened ivory to smoke, smoke to black, throats opening like tiny lacquered cups. The air sweetened the way a lie sweetens when it wants to be taken quickly. Ephra took 1 step backward into the shadow of the door and the dark licked his shoes. He did not gloat. He did not need to. The lilies did it for him, blooming wrong in a ring around the base of the lens like a coronation. A boy near the front flinched. His mother did the consent check, and he found his breath. Lucian's voice brushed my shoulder, velvet thinning to iron. "He has tuned the ward to flowers." Rowan's hand hovered 2 inches from my sleeve, steady. I kept my voice soft because clarity is small and stubborn. "We don't step into color we didn't choose." I raised 1 palm to the crowd so they could see how not to panic. "We hold the yard. We keep to the grass. No one touches the planters." Ephra's smile carried all the grief in the world and none of the guilt. "Come in," he said, like a father with a bedtime story. "Let the lighthouse make you safe." The black blossoms shivered, as if a wind passed that only they could feel, and the door behind him eased wider with a sound like a prayer learning to be a knife. Cliffhanger enough for any city. The wrong flowers open, the right door ready to swallow us, the counselor already inside. I felt the locket heat once, twice, thrice, counting, and set my feet as if the ground were a promise we'd made to each other and to the hour we planned to keep. The yard held its circle like a breath. The hush lilies around the base had ripened to lacquered black, throats yawning sweet as a lie. I dressed for work that might become worship. Charcoal leggings, long-line slate top, my green utility jacket cinched for the climb, braid tight and low, the locket cool coin at the hollow it likes. Rowan touched 2 fingers to his chest, consent check, and I answered with mine. Lucian rolled his sleeves as if the weather had asked him to dance, daylight ring dulled to pewter. We opened the plinth the way the worksman had shown, tap, tap, long press with the back of the fingers like telling a secret you regret. The stone sighed, the hidden drawer slid. Inside, mirror panes wrapped in waxed cloth, coils of salt line, a shallow brass bowl, and a folded diagram in my mother's hand. I breathed toward the paper and the margin note rose like mist, a line lens to Tithe, do not bargain offer. "Offer," I whispered, because words behave better when you teach them their job. We climbed the iron spiral. The lens wore the storm like a crown, wet light skating every facet. Wind threaded the chamber, the floor hummed with sea. I laid salt in clean arcs, wolf, night, thorn, then placed our mirror shard into the missing tooth we'd found days ago. It sat like it had always belonged and simply been away a while. Rowan anchored rope to the strut, gestures flowing sure. Left stare, pivot, fall back, reminding the room we had a language that did not require sound. Lucian set the brass bowl at the lattice throat, filled it with brine he'd lifted from the storm with a cupped hand, and placed his ring in the water. It did not shine. It remembered. "Ready," I said, not to hurry, to invite. Rowan stepped into the wolf arc and laid his palm flat on salt. He didn't have a voice to spend, but the ward doesn't need volume, only truth. He met my eyes, then Lucian's, then the city beyond the glass. When he spoke, it was barely air and still the room leaned to hear. "I choose you." His gaze flicked to me, steady as tide, and consent over command. The locket heated in 3 quick pulses. The salt under his hand took breath. The lattice brightened along the wolf path like water deciding which way is downhill. Something in my ribs unclenched that had locked since I was small enough to hide under clinic tables during thunder. Lucian moved to the night arc, the gentleman making an unkind choice kindly. He lifted the bowl to his mouth, drank once, and set it back, the ring floating for a beat like a small, stubborn moon before it sank and went dull as river rock. His voice came hoarse, scraped thin by salt and years. "Let the day forget me so you can remember yours." The lens answered with a low, pleased note that found the hinge behind my ear and tuned it. My turn, thorn, breath directional, not forceful, toward the cut. I let my eyes soften until the world became edges and air. I thought of my mother's plate, of pups whose throats deserved to ring, of the boy who put his body where a gap wanted to be. The locket warmed under my palm, and the ribs that have always held the bar across my breath eased, then eased again, then unlocked. The first shift came like light sliding under a door. No ripping, no spectacle. Heat rolled over my skin and settled as silver-tipped fur along my arms and spine, as if moonlight had chosen texture. My hands found the floor with new confidence. The chamber's hum resolved into notes I suddenly knew by name. I could smell Rowan's steadiness, cedar and wet rope, and the iron patience of Lucian's restraint, a sweetness like bruised apple denied and denied again. My clothes held, ritual cloth and old magic negotiated decency without being asked. Somewhere in the seam between breaths, my teeth set like polished promises. I didn't growl. I spoke, in the way a body speaks when it finally stands in its shape. Salt lines flared, wolf, night, thorn braiding light across glass. The mirror shard in the tooth of the lattice answered with a clear, bright tone, not loud, precise like a tuning fork struck by a careful hand. Sudden spark. The shard in my pocket, the one Cal pressed into me, sang back, a twin note that found the lens and made the whole crown resonate. "Heartbeat," Lucian said, breathless, because the lattice now pulsed to ours. The heartstone under the lens woke, light gathering like dew in a dark place, and set its one rule on the air, a willing loss. I felt it the way you feel a promise reach for your hand. Rowan's jaw set. He had learned which pain was the right price. He lifted his fingertips from the salt and touched the dark brand at his throat, old command burned into flesh by a man who liked rules more than people, and then pressed his palm to the heartstone's light. For a second, nothing. Then his alpha mark, the claim and burden both guttered, a candle choosing to be a memory. He did not flinch. The lattice brightened, grateful for a leader who would leave a throne rather than keep a leash. I moved to him without thinking and set my palm an inch from his sternum, steady without touch. He breathed. I breathed. The ward listened. Below us, the lilies took a synchronized breath. The door boomed open and Ephra came as if the lighthouse were his suit to put on. He stepped into the lens chamber carrying a strip of polished mirror bone, lattice shard honed to obedience, and his face wore 1,000 forgiven sins. The air around his shoulders shimmered. What sat on his bones was not wolf and not man, but something made from skin weaving gone brave and wrong. Not gore. A monstrosity of posture, limbs that remembered too many owners, a jaw that couldn't decide which memory to honor. "Neighbors," he said, and the word slid sideways out of a mouth that wanted a different voice. "Enough." He swung the shard. He didn't hack. He placed like a surgeon with bad ethics and cracked a lattice pane near the wolf path. Glass shivered like a chime. The ward stuttered. "Ignore the pretty," I told my body, because even a wolf can be lured by a sound that wants to be a bell. I put myself between Ephra and the heartstone and felt the old fear try to climb me. Rowan's hand signals flashed at the edge of sight. Pivot, left stare, fall back, moving the fight's shape so people didn't have to bleed for it. Lucian went to the night arc to meet Ephra's blade. He refused every easy cruelty the shard offered, deflecting with the patience of a saint who had finally learned the joy of saying no. Rain drove against glass, the lens threw the storm's little lights around us like vows. Ephra slid past him, skin rippling like a curtain in wind, and reached for the mirror tooth I'd seated. The cowl's shard in my pocket sang through fabric, a sound I felt in my teeth. I pulled it free with a hand that wasn't a hand anymore and pressed it to the split where his blow had spidered the pain. The shard seeded by wanting alone. The lattice gave a clean. Surprised yes and brightened across the thorn path. Ephra hissed, not animal, not man, annoyed magic. "You do not know what you are buying," he told me, soft and terrible. I did not answer. I breathed toward the cut, and the silver along my spine lifted in a ripple that made the notes align. He changed tactics. He turned toward the stairs and wore Cal's face again for a second, the way a liar wears a smile when they think it will turn a door into a hallway. It might have shattered me yesterday. Tonight the pack's language was in my bones. Teens below flashed steady to each other. A grandmother lifted consent check to the line. No one flinched. No one broke. Ephra's trick found no purchase. "Tradition is a story," I said, Wolflow. "We're writing the ending." Rowan moved like a map, learning a better city, placing people with palm and breath, no voice. He stepped into Ephra's path with the gentlest violence a body can make and placed him backward, away from the heartstone. Lucian cut the air at Ephra's wrist, not to wound, but to teach the hand a new idea about where to live. The storm pressed close. King tide peaked, the sea shouldered the cliff, and the lattice aligned fully for a blink that tasted like victory. In that instant, every pup in the square below lifted a tiny voice, and the hushed moon tried to steal it and failed. One note got free, thin as fishing line and strong as a promise. Ephra felt it, and that ugly cleverness he carries changed shape. He slammed the shard sideways into the night path, smash, a pain ringing and then going dead, and the lens jolted as if someone had kicked a leg off a table. "Hold," I called, because clarity sometimes needs a small shout. My body wanted to lunge. Rowan's open palm held the air in front of me, steady. He didn't stop me, he reminded me to choose. I chose placement, not rage. I slid left and up, pressing the cowl's shard into the seam where night had gone dark, letting Lucian's shadow make the rest. The shard's song found the broken note and taught it a kinder pitch. The pain did not mend, it listened. Ephra laughed that counselor's laugh, pity as weapon. "You can't seat all of it," he said. "You can only let me take the hour, let me keep the book." Rowan, sweat running clean lines along his jaw, set his palm to the floor, and the heartstone, once more, calm as tide, answered through him. He looked up at me, offering something heavier than any command, choice. "Your breath," he signed, fingers close. "Your call." I filled my lungs to the back and exhaled toward the seam that still argued, the way my mother had taught me without teaching me. The room returned a low chord, wolf, night, thorn, braided and thin but whole. The lattice seated along one quadrant, not finished, not lost. Acceptable for now. Ephra felt the pivot and tore at his own skin like a man trying to find the zipper in his wrong suit. For a heartbeat, he was wolf-shaped in the way nightmares are. Too many lines, mouth made for words trying to make a howl. He smashed another pane, glass rained like cold rain, and threw himself backward, not fleeing so much as changing the room by leaving it. He fell through the stair well like water and was gone, a smear of intention headed for the yard where his black blossoms waited to make a choir. The lens trembled and then held. We stood in the ringing quiet that follows a bell that has done its job. I wanted to sit. I didn't. I rested my brow briefly against Rowan's temple, consent asked with the smallest pause, given with the smallest lean. He breathed. I breathed. The ward put our minutes on its ledger. Below, the square drew itself into new lines. The lilies rustled, offended that we had ideas about their future. The sea turned, the peak passed, the pull beginning. We waited for dawn to choose us because that is what stories promise. The sky considered the question and said no. Instead it threw a hard, white flash, storm light so bright it read like noon, and then went black at the edges again, a rim of thunder chewing at the horizon. Clocks in nearby windows ticked to 12 as if someone had leaned a thumb on their faces. The air tasted like pennies and unfinished arguments. "Storm noon," Lucian said softly, a scholar nomming a myth in the wild. "At midnight." The locket burned, brief and bright, like a brand of its own saying remember. The lens threw our reflections back at us, leader without a mark, vampire without a day, wolf with silver at her edges, and the city below held its breath one beat longer than comfortable. Then the bells began to ring, out of rhythm, out of time, every tower asking the same thing in a different key, and we had our cliff to run along. No dawn, a noon made of thunder, and a counselor turned monster somewhere below, teaching flowers to lie. The bells would not agree on a number. They quarreled in the rain while the lens above us breathed hard like a runner who'd reached the wrong finish line. We left the platform without speaking, our bodies already in the language we taught them. 2 fingers, left stare, 3 taps, pivot, open palm, steady without touch. I tightened my storm shell at the waist, checked the cinch on my braid, pressed the locket to the hollow it guards. Rowan tied off the last rope with hands that think faster than fear, field jacket dark with wet. The thin brand at his throat lay like twilight. Lucian rolled his sleeves, coat swung back. His dulled daylight ring sat cold as a coin in a pocket he refused to mourn. We drank from the same bottle, 2 swallows, then 2, then 1 for the stubborn friend who always says he's fine. I dabbed salve at Rowan's throat with the soft gauze we cut from a clinic sheet. He tipped his head, consent offered in the quiet tilt, and my fingers steadied. Lucian's hands shook once when he handed me the salt. He hid it by adjusting a cuff that didn't need adjusting. I pretended not to notice and slipped a honey lozenge into his palm. He pretended not to thank me and let it dissolve. We moved. Across the first roof, rain made a drum out of tar. Lanterns flicked and skated. The salt and iron trail pulled at the front of my mouth, Ephra's aftertaste in the air, like a library on fire. I let my eyes soften until the city was edges and heat instead of stories it told itself to sleep. There, a bent gutter where lilies had bruised their throats, a drain where black petals stuck in a fan. I pointed. Rowan signaled left, clean wrist, and the teens on the far ridge mirrored him so perfectly the motion felt like déjà vu. Steady, I breathed, and 3 bodies below me smoothed a crowd without touching it. Broom, scarf, palm, a choreography against panic. Language wanted to live. Across the deli awning, the Voss Motel sign hiccuped to life in pink. A shadow tried to use the light as cover, and I didn't let it. I dropped to a knee, gloved fingertips on the slick edge, and called down with my hand. Rowan glided past, knees soft, weight on the outside of his feet, placing the man who swung at him into a sit with all the gentleness of an usher who knows the right pew for a grief too big to hold standing up. No throats, no displays. We kept keeping. We fell into the relay checks we'd promised each other, water, bandage, head count maps. A teenage runner skidded into our circle, cap askew, grin feral with usefulness. North stair clear, she signed, fast as rain. Rowan's mouth nearly smiled. He touched 2 fingers to his chest, consent check, and she lit like a match in a safe place. Gray did not lift. It layered. Lucian lost color hour by hour in the knot light, and still he held doorways. Where alleys narrowed, he made space with the width of his shoulders and the temperature of his gaze. When a rogue grabbed for my wrist near the pawn shop shutter, Lucian's hand arrived, 2 inches from the man's throat, no touch, a point drawn in air that said you do not want this. The man remembered his mother, and we kept moving. Drink, I said, passing the bottle under the overhang of a closed barber shop. Rowan sipped. Lucian tried to refuse by looking noble. I set the cap in his palm and closed his fingers over it. He took it, because arrogance is easier to keep than dehydration is to survive. The trail led down, into the service tunnels that pretend to be secret until floods demand their names. We lifted grates and slid into the city's second throat, where concrete kept old rumors for company. The air was a bad perfume, rust, hush lily pollen, wet rope, and a sweetness I do not forgive. Rowan's open hand steadied the space an inch off my sleeve as my lungs tried to miscount. I breathed his rhythm. The locket warmed, with you. We mapped our way with chalk and muscle memory. Left on the pipe with 3 weld scars, right at the slag glass, mind the drop, don't speak the temptation. The temptation was a door, skin-woven light, shimmering like a memory of sunny kitchens. Ephra's trick. I turned my head so it filled my peripheral vision and not my gaze. Ignore the pretty, I whispered, and the ward didn't fight me for once. Shadows moved at the long bend. A pair of boys, wrong hoodies, wrong posture, wore council medallions under their shirts like emergency alibis. We didn't break them. We put them back in their bodies, Rowan's palm to a sternum, my elbow to a wrist, bending harm into rest, Lucian's voice velvet low. This way, you're late for the right thing. They went because remorse travels faster in close air. We surfaced into a vacant factory where light came through broken panes like charity. Pigeons trilled their opinion of revolutions. Rowan three-tapped pivot and our route flowed around a fallen girder without losing tempo. Lucian laughed once, dry, surprised, when a flock startled into our faces and then pretended with exquisite manners that they had always planned to leave. Even birds choose, he murmured. Sometimes. We fed the line with bites. Crackers from a first aid box, a pair gone perfect with bruises, a pouch of kitten milk I would not admit was mine. Hydration bandage relay. When my boot heel split, Rowan wrapped it with duct tape from his pocket the way a man wraps a vow, smooth, no show. His fingers brushed my ankle bone. The wolf under my skin shivered. I stilled. He lifted his gaze, asking. I nodded yes, and he finished the tape with a tidy rip that felt like approval. Hours layered themselves into a kind of music. We crossed storm gutters turned rivers, threw salt at thresholds to keep lilies from learning the trick of doors, sent runners to warn elders not to mistake tradition's shape for its purpose. The city's face changed, tired, bright, sure. By the time we reached the forest belt, the gray had flattened into a language of its own. The roots made tunnels through loam. The hush lilies didn't dare the understory, but the scent of Ephra's work had traveled. I let the wolf take the front of my senses. The world carried in layers, Rowan's cedar and wet rope, Lucian's cool coin and refusal, moss cold under the heat of rotted leaves, iron filings in soil where the lattice had been lowered once as a test. Rowan's touch commands slid over my skin like prompts I had always known. Palms sweep fall back when the ground sloped to a bog, 2 fingers left at a deer run that looked stupid but wasn't. Our hips learned the same timing. Our breath braided. You could call it leading if you were lazy, but what we made was an exchange. Hungry? Lucian asked at a hollow log that had the courtesy to be dry inside. It sounded like he meant me. It sounded like he didn't. I offered my wrist without making a ceremony of it. He smiled, small and wicked with restraint. I appreciate the poetry, he said, and put the bottle in my hand instead. He would never feed. He hated that I knew it. He loved that I knew it. We slept in turns without giving in to sleep. 5 minutes with my cheek on Rowan's thigh while he watched the tree line. 5 with my back to Lucian's shoulder as he listened to the wind for the sound of a blade, remembering it's a tool. No dreams. The body didn't dare. By the time we hit the cliff road, the sea had decided to be an argument again. Foam worried the rocks. The wreck pole flag knotted itself into a grammar that said hurry without saying panic. The lighthouse wore the storm like a veil. The base seethed with lilies gone wrong. The trail pulled like a wire in my teeth. He's home, I said, and the locket burned a yes I felt down my spine. We came in low along the wall to avoid the planters. Neighbors held the yard in a wide U, lanterns high and shoulders open. Pups stared, hands learning signals in their laps. Ephra stood on the lens platform, a smear of wrong under the glass, skin weaving rippling over a body that had forgotten which story it belonged to. He held the shard we'd seen, obedience honed into an edge, and turned it toward me like a compliment. Beloveds, he said, and the word made my back teeth hurt. Enough defending yourselves from your own cure. Come in, kneel. Let me place the silence where it belongs. Rowan's palm hovered at my sleeve, steady, not to stop me, to keep me from giving myself to fury when I owed the city clarity. He signed left stair toward the maintenance ledge we used to service the lantern. I nodded. We took the hidden stair and entered the lens chamber from the seam between glass and sky. Up close, Ephra's monstrosity was all almosts. Almost human, almost wolf, almost a counselor with a tone designed to tuck you in and steal your house. He pressed the shard to the thorn path, and the lattice moaned, a sound like a book spine breaking under a hand that had never loved words. It's kinder if you let me do it, he told me gentle. You'll think you chose and you'll sleep. Kindness isn't anesthesia, I said, and stepped into the arc until the silver down my arms lifted in a bright line. He moved to drag the shard across the seam toward me, to make my body the wick the ward would burn. Stop, Rowan signed, fall back, and I refused because consent also means defiance when the choice is truth or lie. I put my mouth to the edge of the shard. "Rhea," Lucian breathed, not warning wonder. The metal tasted like rain and old mirrors, like the letters in my mother's hand when she'd write my name and smile at the curve. I pressed harder and the wolf in me answered with a low, bright hum. Sudden spark. The shard sang under my teeth, notes calling the lens by the name it had as a young machine, and the lattice answered. I did not bleed. I did not wince. I bit the shard into place, and the pain that had screamed decided to be a doorway instead. "My breath, my choice, not yours." Ephra's eyes lit with a lover's hurt at a beloved who refused a gift. He tore something inside the ugly suit he wore and grew taller, lines threading in his limbs like he'd borrowed 100 backs and none of them fit. He swung for the night path. Lucian slipped inside the arc and placed his blade not to wound, but to re-educate the wrist that held harm. Rowan's hands turned the room into a clean machine. Pivot, left, fall back, bodies moving where they did the best good and the least damage. Below, the yard held its breath and then found it. Pups lifted hands into our silent language, and elders mirrored them. The lilies rattled their black cups like applause for the wrong team. The lattice took our work and strained. Wolf, night, thorn. One quadrant glowed whole, another wavered like heat over summer asphalt, a third fluttered between yes and not yet, the fourth carried a spider of cracks that did not decide. The Heartstone pulsed for payment and found we'd already learned how to give without losing ourselves. Ephra slammed the shard a final time where the pain wanted to heal, and the wall of glass lit all the way around in a halo of stress. White lines, fine as hair, racing the circle. "Hold," I whispered to the lens, to Rowan's hand at my sleeve, to Lucian's bright restraint, to the city below, to the hour we kept, to the pup with a cap who'd learned left stare like he'd made it up. The halo tightened. Glass sang. The tower shook like a cord pulled too hard. For half a breath I saw it, the world with the lattice seated, bells remembering their times, pups finding a song through their own throats, the hush lilies making shade instead of orders. For the other half, shatter, a rain of mirrors, a city that would spend a generation picking itself out of its own skin. Between those halves we stood, the shard warm under my teeth, Rowan's open palm near my heart, Lucian's blade a promise, not a threat, the locket a small sun, the ward counting 1, 2, and not telling us which number came next. The tower sang like glass under a bow. A white halo webbed the lens, hair-fine stress lines racing the circle, while my teeth held the shard I'd bitten into place. If I moved wrong, we shattered. If I didn't move at all, we shattered a different way. Choice has a weight. I could feel it in my shoulders, in the little burn of the locket against my skin. Rowan's open palm hovered an inch from my collarbone, steady without touch, and I let my breath find his rhythm. Lucian stood to my right with the kind of poise that makes violence look like grammar. His knife waited at the angle where it could still change its mind. Ephra's skin weaving rippled. He wore the suggestion of a wolf the way a bad storyteller wears a legend borrowing shape, lacking truth. "Beloveds," he murmured, the shard of obedience bright in his hand. "Let me take it. The hour, the noise, the burden, I'll make you safe." My wolf lifted silver along my arms. I thought of Cal's mother's hand shaking in mine, of pups practicing left stare with the concentration of saints, of Rowan setting his palm to his own heart as if it were a door he kept choosing to open. Safety that asks for your voice is not safety. It's silence with better lighting. "No," I said low. He shifted, too long in the limbs, too soft around the eyes, and thrust his shard toward the thorn path to twist the lattice through me. Rowan three-tapped, pivot, and moved like a map learning new routes, shouldering Ephra off the true line without a bruise to show for it. Lucian's blade showed the shard its reflection and refused to cut flesh. I let the shard hum against my teeth and breathed toward the seam as if it were a frightened animal I meant to gentler into a stall. The lens brightened on the wolf arc, took the night arc into its palm, reached for thorn where my breath lived. The heartstone below us pulsed once, asking, not demanding, a willing loss. "We've already paid," I whispered, and the locket heeded in agreement. Ephra felt the tide turn and tore at the suit of other people he wore. He lunged not at me, but at the pain Rowan had shored with his body alone. Rowan didn't flinch. His hands said the thing his taken voice could not. With you. He set his weight and turned Ephra's momentum into absence, a neat step that would have earned applause in any dance hall. For a sliver of a second, Ephra slipped. Not far, just enough to show the floor he'd been lying to. He reached out, whether for balance or for me, I don't know, and touched the locket where it pressed against my sternum. Heat hissed. My mother's sigil under the glass burned clear. The mirror shard in my pocket, the one Cal had placed in my palm, sang so pure it made the room decide. I spit the seated shard free of my teeth. It held. It held. Now, Lucian breathed hoarse, reverent. We moved as one, my hands finding the lattice's warm seams, Rowan's signals braiding with my body, Lucian's blade writing no in all the languages he knows. The halo tightened and then collapsed inward, not shatter, set, and the noise the lens made was not a cry. It was relief. Ephra saw it, and I watched a man realize there was no role left in the play with his name on it. He tried one last old trick, reached for the cloth in his pocket, drew it to his cheek, and let Cal's face ripple across his bones. Grief kicked me hard enough to stagger 10 versions of me, but grief tonight had hands, and those hands knew signals. Below us in the square, a dozen small arms lifted, the consent check like a quiet forest, and the pack didn't flinch. A grandmother reached up and touched the air the way you touch a name on a wall and keep walking. The trick found no purchase. You don't get to wear our dead, I said, clear. You don't get to sell us our own love. The lattice answered by seating wolf. Night, thorn, light braiding all the way round. The cracks dulled like healed scars. The tower exhaled, the sea took a long, surprised breath. Ephra stumbled, the borrowed faces slewing away like bad weather. He wasn't a monster now. He was a man with a shard and a talent for arranging other people's pain into charts. For a heartbeat, I saw him as he might have been before keys and folios, tired, clever, afraid of being ordinary. Choice opened under him like a stare. He lunged for the vestibule lip anyway, going for his last friendly door. Rowan moved, rope a flick at his hip, forearm a bar that caught Ephra's wrist and placed the shard harmlessly against stone. Lucian stepped through the space his restraint had been saving and turned Ephra's arm with that particular tenderness that teaches a joint where it's safe to live. The shard fell. I put my boot on it, gentle, so the room would accept that our no would always be this kind. Ephra fell the way a verdict does. Not far, not fatal, to the vestibule floor where the black lilies waited to make him holy in the wrong way. He flung a hand toward them and the petals didn't open. They closed. The ward had learned new manners. Bind him, I said softly. People moved, scarves, open palms, rope, no knees in backs, no spectacle. When he was safe to handle, a councilwoman with kind eyes and a clipboard that had always been used for good work said, "I have him," and meant it. I turned back to the lens. It shone like an idea we could keep. The heartstone dimmed to a steady ember. I pressed my palm flat to the glass and heard, like a whisper from a child under a blanket, a dozen little howls waiting for permission. "Breathe," I told the room. It did. Light arrived the way apologies do when they're honest, late, and better for it. Daylight surged into the square like a bright flood. Lanterns died with grateful little sighs. I felt the exact moment the city chose its scar. A slim hour sheared clean from the day and laid aside like a bead on a string, not lost, remembered. Bells recalibrated, one, then two, then all, falling back into tune as if they'd been arguing only to make the harmony sweeter later. Rowan leaned his brow to mine and let out a breath that tasted like salt and home. Lucian stood at the rail and watched the light lay itself along the water, his eyes gone dark, where the day could no longer follow. "Done?" he asked, not quite a smile. "Done," I said, and the locket cooled under my hand. Morning did the small, honest things it does when a city believes itself. Laundry lines lifted. A bus driver waved at a kid he didn't know and meant it. On the hall porch, the pack gathered in clean boots and serious faces, not for spectacle, for governance. Rowan wore a charcoal jacket over a white Henley jeans, throat bare where the mark wasn't. People kept looking there and then looking at his hands instead. We voted in the quiet way, Pebbles into bowls, thumbs to hearts, an old aunt's nod carrying the weight of a dozen loud men. When they asked the room who led them now, no one spoke the word Alpha first. They spoke his name. They spoke what he does when no one is looking. Rowan, I said, because sometimes the person you love deserves to hear it from your mouth in front of witnesses. For how you listen. The cheer that rose didn't hurt anything. He lifted his palm, consent check, and then signed with you across the porch. The boy with the cap flashed left stare like he'd invented it, and the crowd laughed because joy can be competent too. When it was my turn, my hands shook in a way only I could see. They read my name and the short list of things I have done without realizing I was preparing for this. Teaching Lily's better manners, stealing hours back with breath, writing in chalk a new language along the city's edges. The vote came like rain on tin, sure, kind, louder at the corners. Warden of wards, the chairwoman said, eyes shining. Clinic and lighthouse both. The room turned, and I felt something settle in my ribs that had been out of place since childhood. My wolf lifted its silver helpfully to my skin, and then sat down like a polite dog who knows it has your attention. I'll keep it, I said, and meant the whole city by it. We opened the clinic doors and the lighthouse stairs to each other. Teens carried up boxes of gauze and salt. Elders measured window angles for light. A neighbor who bakes like prayer brought a pie and left without being thanked to death. On the new cork wall we pinned signals, drawn large with little stick figures. Left stare, pivot, fall back, steady without touch, consent check, and anyone who walked in learned one sign and taught two. By afternoon, the hush lilies and the planters had decided to behave or be replaced. We dug the beds with pups and grandfathers, fingers in cool earth, and chose white varieties with green throats, the kind that opened to weather instead of to commands. We mixed salt into the soil not as punishment, as promise. Lucian knelt in the dirt with sleeves rolled and pressed a bulb into place as if he were storing a letter. Don't make a church, he told me, smudged and elegant. Make a garden. We can do both, I said, but no pews. Neighbors laughed. The little boy with the cap went very solemn and carried one lily carefully to the base of the stair where the landing makes its small, sad shadow. For Cal, he said, and set it there like a candle that would know when to bloom. The crowd didn't clap. We all breathed. Sudden spark. As we watered the new plants, a wash of pearly light passed over the bed, lens hum translating into soil, and the leaves tilted toward the tower like they'd learned the word keeper. Late sun slanted into the vestibule. It had 1 hour less to spend, and spent it well. The councilwoman who had bound Ephra reported that he would stand trial in a room with windows and witnesses and no lilies in sight. He listened like a man waiting to be told what he'd done. That is its own story, not tonight. Near dusk, a volunteer handed me an envelope, cream laid with a black ribbon. Found on the lens platform, he said. Waited under the ring bowl. My breath made the paper curl warm. I knew the hand by the way the strokes leaned like a gentleman in a doorway. Rhea, the day and I have agreed to love you from different rooms. It is not tragedy. It is proportion. I will keep the sea border. Where light fails, I will stand. Where rogue current pretends to be policy, I will refuse it. If you ever need me, light the third lantern on the cliff road, and do not apologize for wanting help. Tell the boy with the cap that his left stare is better than mine ever was. Zell. I press the paper to my heart because that's where a letter belongs before it goes to a drawer. Rowan read it over my shoulder without hurrying my eyes. When I turned, he touched the edge of the page, consent check, and I nodded. He folded it clean and slid it into the little wooden box where we keep the original clinic keys. 2 kinds of keeping in one place. Do you miss him? Rowan's eyes asked, honest and unafraid of the answer. Yes, I said, but not the way that takes anything from us. Good, his mouth said without moving. His hand, warm, calloused, found the hollow above my collarbone and held the space there like a promise in progress. Heat licked under my skin. My wolf stretched contentedly and set her head on my ribs. The garden turned gold, then honey, then something like the color of old vows. Pups planted the last bulbs, their tongues caught between their teeth in concentration. Elders settled onto the benches we'd scrubbed with salt water. The wind came down off the tower and ruffled hair like blessing. "Before we close," I told the crowd, "we owe each other one small thing." I lifted my hand, and the boy with the cap beamed like he'd been waiting his whole life. He placed his fingers to his chest and offered the consent check to the whole yard. Hands answered, little and big. It felt like fitting a lid to a jar. Rowan's palm found mine. "No more stolen hours between us," he said. No voice, all vow, by shaping the words with his mouth and laying his warm hand to my heart so I could feel the syllables. It landed in me like a key. I smiled, couldn't help it, and set my palm flat to his chest in answer. Then minute-by-minute truth. He nodded once, and the nod felt like the kind of wedding that doesn't need witnesses, because the garden will keep the secret for you. When night came for the city, it found us ready and unafraid. The beam rolled from the lens, clean and patient, sweeping the water like an arm around a shoulder. The pups stood at the low fence with their faces turned up and at midnight lifted their voices. Not a scream, not a dare, a song that knew the shape of its throat. The howl went out over the water and came back soft with yes. I rested the locket where Rowan's hand warmed my collarbone and felt it settle to the temperature of trust. My wolf settled. The city did the kind of sleeping you can wake from without apology. In the garden, the lily the boy had placed leaned toward the stair. Not much, just enough to say remember.